Hi guys. Tonight we slip into a world where snow hisses against the walls of a hide-covered lodge, and the wind seems eager to test the courage of every soul inside. You shuffle forward in heavy boots, or perhaps moccasins if you want to be accurate, and the cold needles your cheeks so sharply you wonder if you'll ever feel your nose again. The snowstorm does not ask for permission. It howls, it presses, it steals breath from lungs. And let's be honest, if you were standing out there right now, in a thin coat, you probably wouldn't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, and let's wander together into the frozen night. The canvas wall before you is not canvas at all, but carefully tanned buffalo hide stretched over wooden poles. Each hide was once part of a living creature that thundered across the plains, and now it holds the storm at bay. The snowflakes slap against it with a dull patter, and you realize how thin that barrier really is. Just a layer of hide, stitched with sinew, stands between warmth and frostbite. You lean closer and hear the creak of wood as the wind shoves against the poles. Yet somehow, inside, there is comfort. You settle onto a fur-lined seat and watch the storm through a small gap at the base. Snow swirls in angry whirlpools outside, and for a moment you wonder, how did people sleep through this? Mainstream accounts tell us that teepees, with their cone-shaped design, were among the most efficient portable shelters in the world, perfect for the nomadic life of the plains tribes. They shed wind better than square tents and allowed heat to rise naturally. But you know what's curious? Some early explorers wrote in their journals that they envied the red man's snug winter lodge more than any log cabin they'd seen. That little aside always makes you grin. Imagine trudging through the snow in heavy European wool and realizing the people you came to civilize had far superior insulation. The warmth inside doesn't happen by accident. Each seam is stitched with thought. You notice the slight overlapping of hides at ground level. That overlap keeps snow from blowing straight in. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some families even stuffed bits of dry grass or moss into cracks when they knew a storm was coming, turning their teepee into something close to a double-paned window. Not glamorous, but clever. Historians still argue whether buffalo hides were truly enough to block the cold at temperatures plunging below -40. Some insist they were, especially with multiple layers and an active fire inside. Others believe families simply endured discomfort we can hardly imagine today. And maybe both are true. Perhaps survival was less about perfect insulation and more about adaptation, patience, and a bit of luck. You breathe deeply, catching the scent of hide warmed by smoke. The air is dry, almost sweet. Each gust outside pushes harder, rattling the poles. You picture snow piling higher and higher around the base, pressing inward like an icy tide. And here's the thing, many people actually welcomed that drift. Snow, once it built up, became another layer of insulation, sealing warmth in. Imagine that. The very enemy trying to freeze you becomes your accidental ally. You shift onto a blanket made of wolf pelts. It feels coarse yet reassuring under your palms. The children nearby are already nodding off, their cheeks rosy from the fire's glow. One little one murmurs in sleep, turning toward the warmth. You wonder what they dream, maybe of buffalo hunts, maybe of sunny grasslands where no storm dares to blow. The steady beat of wind on the teepee becomes almost hypnotic, like a drum keeping time. There's something strange about being in such a small space during a storm. The walls feel thin, but the closeness of bodies, the crackle of fire, the whispered prayers, all combine into a cocoon stronger than stone. You trace the shadows flickering on the hide shapes that look like running horses, then like hands reaching. The fire makes its own bedtime story. And you realize, sleeping here is not just about keeping warm. It's about surrendering to rhythm, trusting that the walls will hold, trusting that snow piling higher means tomorrow will dawn bright. You pull a blanket closer, Hear the faint rattle of beads on someone's clothing, and let the storm's song seep into your bones. The blizzard outside does not care, but inside, life continues. Babies feed, elders mumble in their sleep, dogs curl at the entrance. And you, new to this place, begin to understand how fragile and strong people can be all at once. Fragile because a wall of hide is so thin. Strong because they turned that thin wall into a fortress of survival. So you lay your head down, feeling the snow's weight above, the hide's strength around you, and the fire's pulse within. You close your eyes, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, listening to a world where storm and shelter meet. You blink awake to the same muffled roar outside, the storm still prowling around the lodge, unwilling to leave. The hides creak faintly with each shove of the wind. You pull your blanket tighter, and then notice how the walls themselves seem thicker, heavier. That's when you realize the real secret. Buffalo hides, layered upon each other like a patchwork quilt of survival. Each skin is carefully prepared, scraped, and softened until it can bend without cracking. The hide is tough but supple, and when several are overlapped, they trap pockets of air. You know how your modern winter jacket works with insulation and layers? It's the same principle, except here it's nature's jacket scaled up to the size of a house. Mainstream historical accounts tell us that one teepee might use anywhere from 12 to 20 hides, depending on size. The hides weren't small scraps. They were vast, taken from full-grown bison that once roamed in herds so large early travelers said they looked like dark oceans. You can almost see those herds surging across the plains, the very animals who would later lend their warmth to nights like this. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some families preferred hides from cows rather than bulls. Cow hides were lighter and easier to work with, especially when sewing. Bulls gave thicker, tougher hides better for wind, but far heavier to transport. Imagine arguing with your relatives about whether to use the stubborn bull hides or the manageable cow hides. Knowing the wrong choice might mean teeth, chattering misery all winter. Historians still argue whether these layered hides alone could withstand the kind of brutal blizzards described in settlers' diaries. Some claim that no matter how many skins you piled on, you'd still be chilled through without the fire inside. Others suggest that, combined with smart placement and snow drifts, the hides created such effective insulation that families could actually sit in shirt sleeves near the fire. The truth probably lay somewhere in the middle. You run your hand across one of the inner layers. It feels slightly oily because it is. The hides were treated with animal fat to repel moisture, a trick that kept them from freezing stiff when the storm coated everything with frost. The faint scent of tallow lingers in the air, blending with smoke, giving the lodge a smell that's both earthy and oddly comforting. Look closer, and you'll see the seams. They aren't straight like machine stitches, but diagonal, like vines twining. Each seam overlaps, ensuring no thin slit would open to the wind. The sinew thread creaks faintly as the poles flex, but it holds. You picture hands working these seams by firelight women and girls threading needles through thick skin, laughing, maybe grumbling about sore fingers. Outside, snow piles higher, but you notice something curious. The bottom edges of the hides are deliberately pinned down with stones or sticks. That stops the wind from crawling underneath like an unwelcome snake. And sometimes, snow itself is packed against the base, a paradoxical blanket. You smile, thinking of the irony people back then welcomed snow to keep out cold. As you watch, a child shifts in sleep, pulling a deerskin cover over his shoulders. The firelight glints off the layered hides, making them shine like bronze. You realize how protective they are, not just physically but emotionally. To crawl into a lodge lined with these skins meant crawling into a memory of hunts, of survival, of community effort. Each hide told a story, of the chase, the butchering, the tanning, the carrying. A distant howl cuts through the storm, wolves prowling the edge of camp, searching for a weakness. But the hides muffle the sound, make it less threatening. You stretch your legs, toes brushing the hide wall, and feel its cold firmness. Yes, It lets some chill through, but compared to outside, it's like paradise. And you notice another detail: soot stains near the smoke hole. They tell you this teepee has seen dozens of fires, dozens of storms. The hides are not new, they're seasoned, darkened by use, infused with the lives lived inside. You close your eyes again, thinking about how much labor goes into one night of warmth. Hunting the buffalo, skinning, scraping, stretching, sewing, treating with oils, setting the lodge, layering every piece, all so a family can sleep through a snowstorm. The storm rages on, uncaring, but inside, these hides hold the line. So you settle deeper into your blanket, hearing the wind test every seam. It presses, it rattles, it moans, but the hides stay firm. And for the first time, you let yourself drift, knowing the storm may win someday, but not tonight. The night grows long, and the storm outside still has claws. The wind scratches, it howls, and the snow slams against the hides, as though determined to claw its way inside. Yet the glow at the lodge's center offers defiance. You turn toward it, blinking against the flicker of firelight. The heart of every teepee is its fire. You see the flames dancing low, coaxed carefully, so they neither smoke too much nor burn out. Orange light splashes over the curved walls, and for a moment you forget the blizzard entirely. It feels as though you are floating in a pocket of warmth, the outside world reduced to faint growls beyond the hide. Most historians agree that the central fire was more than a convenience. It was a lifeline. Without it, the interior would quickly become an icebox, and no amount of hides or furs could save you from frostbite. The teepee's cone shape created a natural chimney effect, guiding smoke upward and allowing air to flow even when flaps were partially shut. Clever, isn't it? A form of engineering born from necessity, perfected through centuries of trial and error. What might surprise you is how carefully families treated that fire. Children were warned not to throw scraps carelessly into it, because embers were precious. Sparks flying upward could scar the hides or worse, burn a hole. Some bands even taught their little ones to feed the flames with tiny sticks almost ceremonially, as though each offering mattered. And in truth, each spark did. On a night like this, fire meant life. Researchers remain divided on how hot a lodge truly became during these snowstorms. Some claim that the temperature could rise enough for people to strip down to just their shirts while sitting near the flames. Others argue that the warmth rarely spread beyond a narrow circle, leaving sleepers on the edges to shiver beneath heavy furs. The evidence leaves room for disagreement, because few outside witnesses ever experienced a winter storm exactly the way native families did. You sit cross-legged now, watching the smoke spiral upward. The logs are not many. Each piece is chosen with care. Gathering wood in a storm is no small feat, and supplies had to be stretched. The fire is built deliberately small, just enough to throw steady heat without burning through the night's rations. Its crackle is soft, steady, like a purring animal. You lean closer, palms out, feeling the sting of thawing fingers. The flames paint shadows across the walls. One moment you see a hunter drawing his bow, the next, a herd of bison charging. The fire tells its own stories without words. Around it, the family huddles, elders leaning back on mats, children pressed against their mothers, dogs curling near the entrance. You notice how everyone's place is fixed, not random. Elders often sat closest to the fire, guiding adjustments to the flaps, ensuring safety. Younger ones filled the edges, where cold pressed hardest. The smell drifts over you, wood smoke laced with fat from earlier cooking. It clings to your hair, your clothes, your skin. You might grumble about it in modern life, but here it is strangely soothing. The scent means warmth, means supper, means safety. When you inhale, you taste not just smoke but survival itself. Outside, the storm lashes on, furious that it has been denied entrance. You picture snow piling higher against the lodge, muffling the world. Inside, though, time softens. A young boy pokes at the embers with a stick. and his grandmother chuckles softly, murmuring something you can't quite catch. The words rise and fall like lullabies, half drowned by the hiss of snow. It strikes you how fragile this system seems. Fire inside a hide house, smoke threading upward, snow pressing down. One wrong move, and it could collapse. Yet here it is, working as it has for generations. Documented accounts from traders note that teepees often impressed outsiders with their warmth compared to log cabins hastily built by settlers. Imagine trudging into camp, your beard frosted solid, only to step inside a lodge glowing like a lantern. An unusual detail recorded in some journals is that people sometimes banked the fire at night with dried buffalo chips. Not glamorous, certainly not fragrant, but effective. The slow burn of dung kept embers alive until morning. You smile at the practicality. A resource most would dismiss turned into a quiet lifesaver. Anthropologists continue to wonder whether the fire's role was purely practical or also deeply symbolic during storms. For many tribes, flame was sacred, a living presence that connected the physical and spiritual. Was every storm night a vigil of sorts, where people weren't just warming their hands but also guarding a spiritual bond? The answer isn't certain, and perhaps that mystery itself kept the fire revered. You stretch your legs toward the glow. Heat prickles your shins even as your back feels the draft from the wall. That contrast defines the night. One side of your body warmed, the other chilled. You shuffle closer to even it out, understanding why families often rotated spots, like planets orbiting a Sunday. Children snuggle against their parents, their breathing soft. Dogs twitch in sleep, paws flexing as if chasing dream prey. The fire crackles, steady, unbothered by the storm's rage. You realize how hypnotic it becomes, lulling even the adults into drowsy half-silence. Words taper off. Only the flames speak now. You close your eyes, and for a moment you feel as though you are inside a beating heart, the fire pulsing, the storm pounding outside like blood against skin. The lodge breathes with you, sighing smoke, whispering warmth. You let yourself sink into that rhythm, surrendering to the timeless balance of danger beyond and comfort within. The fire crackles low, and as you lean back, you notice something curious along the bottom of the lodge. Snow, the very enemy pounding against the teepee, has been coaxed into service as a silent guardian. You peer at the base and see the way it piles naturally against the hides, pressed tighter by the storm's fury. At first it seems like trouble snow means cold, snow means wet. Yet here, it becomes insulation, like thick white mortar sealing the seams of a house. Early travelers across the plains frequently remarked that snowbanks around lodges made them strangely snug, almost as though the families had borrowed a trick from fox dens. It is well established that snow, once packed, traps air and holds warmth better than bare hides. In a paradoxical twist, the storm that tried to freeze you could also lend a hand in keeping you alive. You can almost hear the muffled laughter of those who first discovered the trick, let the snow do the work for us. One curious practice involved deliberately shoveling snow up against the lower walls, rather than brushing it away. It may seem counterintuitive, but families understood the science of comfort instinctively. Snow insulates, snow seals, snow quiets. From the inside, you feel its effect. The wind's shriek dulls to a softer moan, and the drafts near your legs grow less biting. The storm has been turned into a blanket. There's ongoing discussion about whether this technique was universal across tribes or adapted only in harsher regions. Some anthropologists argue that winter camps on the northern plains made heavy use of snowpacking, while groups further south rarely needed it. Others counter that even in milder zones, snow was occasionally welcomed as a helper. The truth may be impossible to pin down. Each band adapted as it saw fit, guided by terrain, season, and sheer survival instinct. You stretch your hand toward the wall. The hide feels firm, cold, and slightly damp where the snow presses hardest. Yet inside, the air remains steady, warmed by fire and bodies. You imagine how many times elders had shown younger members this trick, Don't scrape it away, leave it there. It will help us sleep tonight. The sound changes too. Outside, the blizzard is violent, but where the snow has packed, its voice softens. You catch yourself listening, lulled by the muffled rhythm. The teepee becomes a drum, beating quietly as snow layers itself higher. You close your eyes and think of burrowing animals, badgers, foxes, even bears who knew long before people that snow could be a shelter, not just a hazard. An unusual observation from early ethnographers notes that children sometimes played games with these snowbanks. They would poke tiny holes through the hides to watch flakes sparkle, until scolded for letting cold seep in. You grin at the image, little fingers making trouble, elders shaking heads, and then quickly plugging the holes with moss or leather scraps. Mischief and survival dancing together under one roof. Some experts insist that snow was a double-edged sword. Too much piled weight could strain the poles, threatening collapse. Others note that meltwater might seep through, dampening hides and bedding. Families, they argue, had to strike a delicate balance. Enough snow to insulate, not enough to drown. The debate lingers because accounts vary, and storms themselves were unpredictable. Perhaps each family learned through trial and error, night by night, drift by drift. You open your eyes again. The firelight glows on the packed wall, turning snow faintly golden where thin layers meet the hide. It feels like a lantern's halo pressed against the dark. You lean your head back, listening to the hiss of flakes, the occasional thump of a falling clump. Despite the storm's persistence, the lodge has grown quieter, calmer. The air smells of smoke and damp leather, faintly earthy, almost sweet. You take in a deep breath, grateful. Your toes wiggle under a pelt, and the warmth feels richer than before. You realize that the snow outside, fierce and endless, has been turned into an ally tonight. The children near you murmur in sleep, their breath steady. A woman adjusts a hide flap slightly, ensuring smoke slips out without letting cold pour in. She nods with satisfaction, then curls back beside her family. You imagine the peace in her heart, knowing that the very storm trying to batter her down has been tricked into standing guard instead. The snow hushes everything now. It's like a great quilt pulled over the camp, silencing wolves, muting the wind, softening every step. Tomorrow, it may be a burden, heavy to clear, hard to travel through, but for now, in this moment, it is a protector. So you lie back, letting your eyelids droop, feeling the paradox of snow, killer outside, guardian at the wall, and as the fire breathes, the hides hold and the storm sighs, you drift deeper into the strange comfort of a night where even the fiercest cold can become your friend. The fire hums lower now, a slow heartbeat in the center of the lodge, and the storm continues to gnash its icy teeth outside. You shift slightly, noticing how close everyone is pressed together. The space is not large, yet it holds an entire family, parents, children, perhaps a grandparent or two, and the inevitable dogs tucked against the hides. You feel the collective warmth, a living furnace of shared breath and body heat. According to traditional records, sleeping in close quarters wasn't just about affection, it was survival science. The human body releases a steady stream of warmth, and when several bodies share that space, the temperature climbs enough to make the night bearable. It is the same principle as penguins huddling on Antarctic ice, or deer clustering in groves. Your own warmth alone might not suffice, but together the cold is held at bay. What might surprise you is how carefully families arranged themselves. Parents often took the outer edges, shielding children from drafts creeping along the hides. Elders were given favored spots nearer the fire, both for their comfort and for their wisdom in monitoring the flames through the night. Sometimes the very youngest were wrapped in furs and placed almost directly between parents, creating a cocoon of warmth. If you've ever camped in winter with friends, you'll recognize the logic. Nobody sleeps alone. Some anthropologists continue to debate whether this closeness was entirely welcome. Imagine nights where space was scarce, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with smoke and breath. Some experts argue that irritation and fatigue would have been constant companions. Others believe the intimacy built stronger bonds, teaching patience and resilience. The truth may be both that survival demanded togetherness, even if a few elbows jabbed in the dark. You adjust your blanket, listening to the synchronized breathing around you. A low snore rumbles from one corner, countered by the soft sigh of a child dreaming. The chorus of sound feels oddly reassuring, like a tide you can float upon. In the modern world, you might crave silence at night, but here, silence would be terrifying. Noise means life, means others are close, means warmth is shared. A lesser-known detail is that children were sometimes lulled to sleep not by lullabies alone, but by the steady thump of a drum or the soft rattle of beads. These sounds, combined with the storm outside, created a layered rhythm that wrapped the lodge in security. You imagine lying there, eyelids heavy, listening to the fire's crackle blending with a grandmother's humming voice, and suddenly even the fiercest blizzard feels distant. Your skin brushes another's arm as you shift again, and you realize how little privacy exists. Every cough, every turn, every sigh is shared. Yet in this lack of space, there is also comfort. No one is left alone in the dark. The community is your blanket. You think of how modern life often insists on separate beds, separate rooms, even separate houses for each family. Here, the very opposite is true. The storm teaches that closeness is survival. Perhaps this explains why stories, traditions, and laughter spread so easily in these lodges. Every night was a gathering, every storm a reminder that you only endure together. Accounts from explorers often marveled at this closeness, noting how the natives sleep in bundles, like so many puppies in straw. The comparison might be clumsy, but you can see the truth in it. Puppies huddle for warmth, for safety, for love. Humans, too. You smile at the thought. The storm rages outside, but inside, you are surrounded by warmth on every side. The air smells of furs, of sweat, of smoke, all mingling into a scent that is not unpleasant but grounding. Your own breath condenses faintly in the chill edges of the lodge, but within the huddle it is warmer, easier. Some experts suggest that this practice of shared sleeping also influenced dreams and visions. With bodies pressed close, breathing in rhythm, dreams could take on communal qualities, stories shared in the morning that seemed woven together, as if the storm had whispered the same message into many ears at once. Others dismiss this as romantic speculation, but you wonder, haven't you ever woken from a dream that seemed to echo the mood of a room? You pull your furs higher, nestling closer. The warmth seeps in more steadily now. The fire glows faint, but its pulse is echoed in the heat radiating from those around you. The storm howls louder for a moment, shaking the poles, but no one stirs. Sleep holds them tightly, the huddle proving stronger than the blizzard's fury. One dog shifts, pressing its back against your foot. Its body is a small furnace, fur thick, tail curled over its nose. You grin softly, another source of heat, another companion in the night. So you breathe with them all, listening, sharing, drifting. The storm can shout as long as it wants. Here, pressed shoulder to shoulder, you know the secret. Warmth is not found in solitude. It is found in the gentle closeness of those who share the night with you. You stir slightly, rolling onto your side, and your hand brushes something firm yet springy beneath the furs. It isn't bare ground. No, you feel woven willow branches, mats of reeds, and layers of brush set carefully to lift you above the frozen earth. In the storm's teeth, such a detail might seem minor, but it's not. In fact, it's the difference between waking with frostbitten limbs and waking with energy for the next day. It is well established that native families understood the dangers of sleeping directly on snow-packed or frozen ground. The cold seeped upward like an invisible thief, robbing warmth even from the thickest fur coverings. To counter it, bedding platforms were fashioned, sometimes no more than bundled grass or rush mats, sometimes sturdier frames of poles and woven twigs topped with hides. Think of it as an early mattress, practical yet ingenious. What might surprise you is how much thought went into these simple layers. Travelers recorded that willow branches were particularly prized because they bent rather than snapped, providing spring and airflow. On top of them came mats, then skins, deer, elk, or buffalo, depending on what the family had. The arrangement looked crude, yet when you sink into it, the sensation is closer to a bed than you expect. It creaks softly under your weight, but it also keeps your body dry, elevated above the damp breath of the snow. Some anthropologists still debate whether raised bedding was universal practice or more common among families who wintered in harsher climates. Some argue that in milder zones, furs spread directly on the ground sufficed, while in the brutal north, elevated bedding was essential. Others insist the platform habit was widespread, pointing to oral traditions that emphasize the importance of lifting oneself above the frozen earth. The question lingers like smoke, perhaps, because the evidence varied by tribe, season, and resource availability. You lie still, noticing the texture beneath you. There is a faint, earthy smell like dried reeds, faintly sweet. The mats rustle when you shift, a reminder that survival often hums in the smallest details. A thin platform, a cushion of grass, a trick against the earth's chill, these things keep the storm at bay. An unusual note from a missionary's journal describes families sometimes stuffing dried sage or juniper into bedding layers. Not only did it cushion the ground, but it released faint scents when warmed by body heat. You smile at the thought, falling asleep to the subtle fragrance of sage, even as the blizzard outside screams. Practicality meets comfort, a blend of necessity and gentle indulgence. You run your fingers along the hide stretched atop the bedding. It's stiff in some places, softened in others by years of use. You picture a mother laying it out carefully, smoothing wrinkles, tucking corners to ensure no drafts sneak through. The bedding isn't just comfort, it is ritual. Each night's arrangement reinforces care, stability, and hope that the family will rest safely until morning. Outside, the storm groans again, rattling the poles, but the bedding beneath you feels secure. You realize that the warmth radiating from others around you works even better when the cold from below has been blocked. The lodge has become a layered defense, hides above, snow pressed around, fire at the heart, and now, the humble mat beneath. Most observers who wrote about winter lodges admitted grudging admiration for this ingenuity. They came expecting hardship and misery, only to discover systems of survival so refined that nights inside were described as remarkably tolerable, even cheerful. One explorer confessed in his diary that he slept better on a mat of woven grass and buffalo hides than in his own canvas tent with a cot. Your own body relaxes as you nestle into the bedding. It gives slightly, cradling your shoulders and hips. You realize how thoughtful such construction was, not random, not haphazard, but born of generations of knowledge that whispered, "Keep your back from the frozen earth, and you will live." Some experts maintain that these raised platforms also helped with air circulation. Heat rose from the fire, cold air pooled at ground level, and by lifting sleepers just a little higher, the air felt warmer, less biting. You breathe deeply now, noticing the difference when you lift your hand from the mat toward chest height. The air near your face indeed feels less cold than what swirls near the floor. Small tricks of physics, mastered without textbooks. A lesser-known detail mentions that children often made beds into play areas before sleep, bouncing lightly on mats, giggling as though on miniature trampolines. Adults scolded them. Of course, don't wear it out. Don't spill soup on it, but you can't help but picture the laughter echoing even as the blizzard howled. Play and survival, side by side, woven into nightly routines. You shift again, letting the bedding support your weight, and gaze at the flicker of firelight above. The shadows dance, the lodge breathes, and you feel strangely secure. Not because the storm is gone, it still claws outside, but because every layer of defense has been considered. Hides, snow, fire, closeness, bedding. Each piece builds upon the other, forming a fragile yet astonishing fortress. The bedding creaks softly, a lullaby in its own right. You close your eyes, imagining centuries of others who lay just so, listening to the same storm, trusting the same mats to guard them. Their breath mingled with yours, their dreams echo in yours, their resilience cradles you tonight. And so, as the fire sighs, as the snow presses closer, as your body rests on branches and hides lifted gently above the frozen ground, you let yourself drift further into sleep's embrace. The storm may never stop, but you have found a place above the cold, and for now, that is enough. The storm still prowls outside, dragging icy fingers across the hides, but inside, another layer of the night reveals itself not in what you see, but in what you smell. The lodge is alive with aromas that wrap around you as surely as the furs on your shoulders. According to numerous accounts from early traders, winter nights inside teepees always carried the same mixture: wood smoke, tallow, and animal hide. It is well established that such scents became so common that travelers remarked they could recognize a lodge before even entering. To people living here, those smells meant home, security, and the promise of warmth. One curious practice involved using tallow lamps, or even bits of fat tucked into embers. They gave off not only light but also a greasy, savory fragrance that clung to every surface. You notice it now thick, almost sweet, faintly bitter at the edges. It's not the perfumed air of your modern bedroom, but after a while, it soothes you, reminding you that heat is being fought for and won, one ember at a time. Researchers remain divided on whether people found these scents comforting or oppressive. Some describe the air as heavy, smoky, and stinging to the eyes, while others write of the coziness, the safety, the reassurance that such scents brought. The debate continues, but as you inhale tonight, you sense both sides at once, a prickle in your throat, yet also a calmness, knowing the storm's chill cannot erase this warmth. The hides themselves contribute their own aroma. Stretched, smoked, and treated with fat, they exude a leathery scent, earthy and grounding. You run your fingers along the inner wall and feel its roughness. Hear the faint squeak of hardened skin under your touch. The smell clings to your fingertips, reminding you that the very walls are organic, once living protectors now standing against the storm. A lesser-known detail is that some families deliberately burned herbs, sage, cedar, or sweetgrass when storms howled the loudest. Not only did the fragrance freshen the smoky air, but many believed it carried protective power, keeping spirits of illness or misfortune away. You imagine the tendrils of scented smoke curling upward, weaving with the blizzard's fury, a quiet act of defiance in the face of chaos. The fire breathes again, popping softly, sending more scent into the space. Bits of fat drip and hiss, and the lodge fills with that savory aroma like roasting meat, though no meal is cooking now. It lingers on clothing, in hair, in every fibre of the bedding. You know that even stepping outside tomorrow, the scent will cling like an invisible blanket, announcing where you have spent the night. Anthropologists continue to wonder whether such constant immersion in smoke and tallow affected health significantly. Some argue it caused coughing, eye irritation, and shortened breath. Others insist that lungs adapted and the warmth outweighed the drawbacks. Perhaps the truth lies in the middle. Discomfort was real, yet the alternative, sleeping without fire, was unthinkable. Survival meant accepting smoke as the price of warmth. You notice how the children near you are undisturbed by it. Their little chests rise and fall steadily, faces turned into furs. They have grown up with these scents, and to them, the air is not strange or unpleasant, but the very smell of safety. You smile softly, realizing that context shapes comfort. The storm slams harder against the lodge, shaking loose a little powder of snow through the smoke hole. It falls, hissing as it meets the embers, releasing a faint hiss of steam. For a moment, the air smells sharper, cleaner, as if the storm itself has poked its nose inside and then retreated again. You close your eyes, letting the sensory world wash over you. The scent of hides, The taste of smoke at the back of your throat, the faint tang of tallow all combine into an atmosphere you can almost chew. In a modern sense, it might be overwhelming, but here, it is the fabric of survival. What surprises you further is how these odors eventually lull you into sleep. They form a pattern, a sensory lullaby. The smoke scratching lightly in your lungs, the sweet fatty comfort of tallow, the leathery embrace of hides. They ground you, tether you to the warmth inside, even as the storm tries to rip everything away. One explorer once quipped that he could never wash the smell of a night in a teepee from his coat, no matter how hard he scrubbed. Perhaps he meant it as complaint, but you suspect it was also memory proof that he had been sheltered when the blizzard threatened to erase him. So you breathe again, deeper this time, and allow the scents to carry you further into drowsiness. Each smell is a reminder. Smoke means fire still lives. Fat means food has been stored. Hide means walls still hold. Together they tell you that you are safe, at least for now. And with that reassurance, you let the storm fade to background noise, your senses anchored instead to the smoky, leathery, tallow-sweet cocoon of the lodge. It isn't perfect, it isn't glamorous, but it is life. You close your eyes, surrendering to the fragrant embrace of the night. The storm hums on like a great drum outside, steady and insistent, yet within the lodge another rhythm rises, one made not of weather, but of people. Your ears adjust to the quiet interior, and suddenly you catch the low threads of song. Someone hums, voice deep and slow, carrying no words at first, only sound. It winds between the crackle of the fire and the breathing of sleepers, weaving the storm into something almost musical. Most observers who wrote about winter camps agreed that music was never far from native homes, even in the harshest conditions. It is well established that lullabies, chants, and the soft rattling of instruments often filled the night. The songs were not always grand performances. Sometimes they were no more than a grandmother's murmur or a father's rhythm tapped softly on a drumhead to calm restless children. You imagine those faint notes, slipping past the blizzard's growl, carrying a message: rest, you are safe. One unusual detail described by early travelers is that some families used rattles made from gourds or even turtle shells filled with pebbles. The soft shake created a rhythm that mirrored falling snow or the rush of wind itself. Children, wrapped in furs, would listen wide-eyed at first, then slowly close their eyes as the sound repeated again and again. What might seem noisy in daylight became a lullaby at midnight. There is ongoing discussion among ethnomusicologists about how much these night songs were meant purely for comfort and how much carried deeper spiritual significance. Some argue they were practical tools to distract children from hunger or fear during a storm. Others suggest that even the simplest hum carried meaning, calling on ancestors or spirits to watch over the family. The evidence is scattered, but perhaps the truth, as often happens, lies in both. A lullaby could soothe a baby and invoke unseen protection at the same time. You tilt your head, listening more closely. The melody has no clear beginning or end. It circles gently, like smoke spiraling toward the smoke hole. Your body relaxes, matching the rhythm unconsciously. The storm becomes part of it, the wind's howl joining the tune, the rattling poles providing percussion. Nature and human voice blend until you can't separate them. The firelight flickers, throwing golden shadows across the walls. In that shifting glow you see lips moving, a figure swaying ever so slightly, eyes half closed as the song continues. The sound is not meant to entertain, not meant for applause, but to cradle minds. Even you, outsider though you are, feel your heartbeat slowing in time with the song. A lesser-known detail. Sometimes children themselves took up the role, whisper, singing to dolls made from scraps of hide or bundles of grass. Their high voices, thin as frost, floated through the lodge, mimicking the cadence of adults. You smile at the thought tiny singers practicing for the day they too would lull others against winter's roar. You notice how the music changes the room. Tension softens. A baby who whimpered moments ago sighs and turns into sleep. Adults murmur less, drawn into the tune. Even the dogs shift, ears flicking, as though reassured. The song doesn't banish the storm, but it gives everyone a rhythm to lean on, a pattern in the chaos. Scholars remain divided on whether certain melodies were shared across tribes or entirely unique to each family. Some evidence suggests lullabies carried common themes: sleep, safety, dreams of the hunt, while others argue that every household had its own versions, passed down like heirlooms. Perhaps both are true, some songs universal, others fiercely personal, whispered only within certain hides on certain nights. The rattling outside grows louder, but the singing inside swells gently in answer. It is not competition, it is harmony. You realize the storm and the song are performing a duet, the blizzard pounding its furious rhythm, the humans answering with softness, refusing to be silenced. The fire shifts, throwing sparks upward. One ember snaps loudly, and for a moment the humming pauses. Then, as if deciding not to surrender, the voice resumes, softer at first, then steady once more. You sink further into your furs, lulled by the persistence. What surprises you is how the song draws you inward. Your thoughts slow, your breathing evens. You are no longer simply observing but participating. Your pulse joins the rhythm. Your mind drifts with the melody. You are part of the communal sleep, held by sound as surely as by warmth. Some explorers admitted, sometimes grudgingly, that these night songs were the most peaceful moments of their journeys. One wrote that he felt as though the storm were a child outside the tent, and we inside were its parents, singing it to calm. That image makes you smile, humans daring to soothe the very blizzard that threatened them. The song continues, winding through the hours. You let it carry you, imagining all the generations who listened to similar tunes, wrapped in hides, while storms roared endlessly across the plains. The melodies changed, perhaps. The voices aged, but the rhythm of survival, of comfort, remained. So you close your eyes, letting the lullaby sink into your bones. The storm howls, the fire flickers, but the music teaches you to rest. You drift, half dreaming, knowing that even the fiercest night can be softened by the simple gift of song. The night stretches onward, and though the fire burns low, another comfort reveals itself above your head. You glance upward and see bundles hanging from the lodge poles, carefully tied pouches, skins, and woven bags dangling just out of reach of children or prowling dogs. At first they look like odd decorations, but then the truth settles in. These are the winter food stores, lifelines swaying gently in the storm's breath. Most historical accounts agree that pemmican was the staple of winter survival. It is well established that this mixture of dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries could last for months without spoiling. You picture the long preparation. Strips of buffalo or elk dried in the sun, pounded into powder, blended with melted fat until dense and rich, a block of energy disguised as humble brown lumps. Not exactly a feast for your modern palate, but in a storm like this, it was gold. What might surprise you is how pemmican wasn't only practical but also spiritual in a way. Some families treated the hanging bundles almost like guardians. Children were taught not to touch without permission, not because of greed but because each pouch represented survival carefully measured. To squander it was to insult not just the family but the bison who gave its life. There is ongoing discussion among historians about whether pemmican was consumed sparingly during storms or freely when fear of starvation loomed. Some records suggest strict rationing with only a pinch shared at night. Others hint at more generous portions, especially when hunters felt confident that herds waited beyond the storm. The reality probably shifted. Storm to storm, family to family, sometimes restraint, sometimes relief. You imagine the scent of those bundles, faint but present. Dried meat carries a smoky tang, while berries add a tart sweetness that survives even months in storage. Fat holds it all together, dense and waxy, like the glue of survival. Hanging above, The pouches release just enough aroma to remind you that food exists, that hunger will not claw too deeply tonight. A lesser-known detail from travelers' journals describes how some people also hung dried fish, cornmeal, or wild rice in similar bundles, depending on region and trade. The teepee ceiling thus became a pantry, a suspended larder, keeping stores safe from damp floors and nibbling animals. You look up again and see the ingenuity. Every pole, every rope, pressed into service. Nothing wasted, nothing left vulnerable. One explorer, clearly envious, remarked that a lodge in storm holds its belly overhead. You chuckle softly at his phrase. It paints the picture perfectly. Food as the stomach of the teepee, always above, watching over the sleepers below. Some experts argue that beyond sustenance, these hanging stores provided psychological comfort. In the middle of a howling blizzard, the mere sight of food was reassurance. It told the family, yes, we are trapped. Yes, the world outside is furious, but we will not starve tonight. You know that kind of reassurance even now, how the presence of a stocked cupboard in your own home can quiet anxiety. Multiply that by 100, and you understand the power of these bundles. You shift slightly, eyes still drawn upward. The flicker of firelight paints the hanging skins in bronze and gold, shadows swinging like guardians. Children stir and sigh, comforted by more than warmth. They are cradled by the knowledge that food waits above. One unusual observation from an early missionary notes that mothers sometimes told children the bundles were sleeping animals, watching over them. A way to discourage midnight nibbling, perhaps, but also a story that gave the lodge more life. You grin at the thought pemmican with a personality, a silent babysitter dangling in the rafters. The debate among scholars continues about whether families relied solely on such stores or also risked brief hunts during storms. Some argue that hunters would brave almost any weather, driven by the certainty that hunger lay ahead. Others insist that wisdom dictated patience, conserving strength until the storm eased. Likely both were true. Decisions weighed each night with gravity no outsider can fully grasp. The air shifts as a draft sneaks in, carrying the smell of smoke upward. It mingles with the faint aroma of dried meat overhead, creating a cocktail of scents that feels oddly reassuring. You inhale deeply, tasting not only the lodge but the promise of tomorrow. You think of your own world, where food is tucked in refrigerators, sealed in boxes, hidden behind doors. Here, nothing is hidden. The sustenance of life dangles in plain sight, a constant reminder that storms end and hunger can be beaten. The fire pops again, briefly illuminating the bundles. They sway slightly, like pendulums marking the hours of the storm. You imagine the generations who gazed upward just as you do, measuring hope by the size of the larder, drawing comfort from its presence. And you realize something. Survival in storms was not only about warmth, not only about hides or snow insulation, it was also about the mind. To see food waiting was to calm fear, to steady dreams, to make rest possible. Without that reassurance, perhaps even warmth could not have lulled you to sleep. So you breathe easier now, eyes drifting shut, belly comforted not by fullness but by the knowledge that sustenance rests above. The storm may roar, but the lodge has a pantry in the sky, and that promise is enough to carry you deeper into the night. The fire flutters low, shadows stretch, and your ears prick at something beyond the familiar hum of wind. A sound sharper, wilder, threads through the storm, the long, hollow howl of wolves. Their voices ride the gale, weaving in and out of the blizzard's roar. You sit still, listening, heart tightening for a moment. It isn't imagination. They are out there, pacing beyond the snowbanks, their hunger sharpened by winter. Accounts from explorers frequently noted that wolves followed camps during hard winters. It is well established that these animals learned to stalk the edges of settlements, drawn by scents of meat, hides, and refuse. To people inside the lodge, the howls were no novelty. They were nightly reminders that the storm was not the only enemy. What might surprise you is how differently those howls were perceived. To you, they might mean fear, but to families here, wolves were also teachers. Some tribes respected them as symbols of loyalty and cunning, their presence folded into stories that explained survival itself. The howl outside might raise goosebumps, yet it also reminded listeners of kinship with creatures enduring the same storm. Researchers remain divided on how often wolves posed a real danger to camps. Some records claim they rarely dared approach close, more scavengers than predators when humans and fire were near. Others argue that in desperate winters, packs could grow bold, even threatening lone hunters. The debate lingers, sharpened by scattered stories, some tinged with fear, others with reverence. The lodge shifts faintly in the wind. You look toward the entrance flap, picturing the world outside, a white blur of snow, shapes moving in the distance, lean bodies circling. Inside, the family murmurs softly. An elder grunts, shifting on his mat, perhaps noting the sound without alarm. Children curl tighter under hides, but no one panics. Danger is acknowledged, not indulged. A lesser-known detail from early diaries mentions that dogs inside lodges often responded first, ears twitching, low growls vibrating in their throats. Tonight you feel it at your feet. The dog, who has pressed close to you, stiffens, lifts its head, and releases a faint rumble. It does not bark, not yet. Just a warning, a shared signal. Something stirs beyond the canvas wall. The fire answers with a snap, embers glowing brighter for a moment. You glance upward at the hanging food bundles, realizing the wolves likely smell them too. That thought prickles your skin, yet it also makes you appreciate the design of the lodge. Food kept high, hides sealed, snowbanks packed. Wolves may circle, but entry is denied. Some anthropologists still discuss whether storms themselves increased wolf boldness. Did the snow mask human scent blur the line between wild and domestic space? Did hunger drive the animals closer when herds dispersed and hunting grew hard? Evidence remains uncertain, but the question lingers, echoing in the dark like the howls themselves. The sound rises again, several voices this time, layering into a chorus. The storm swallows half of it, but you hear enough to know the pack is large. Yet the reaction inside remains measured. A woman pulls her child closer. Another throws a stick onto the embers, coaxing flame higher. These are not gestures of panic, but of routine. Wolves howl, fire grows, bodies press closer. The ritual of response is as old as the lodge itself. You draw your blanket tighter, feeling the atmosphere shift. Fear does not rule, but vigilance does. A man near the entrance adjusts his bedding so that his bow rests within easy reach. A knife glints faintly in firelight, laid close to hand. You sense the balance here, trust in the lodge, yet readiness for what prowls outside. An unusual note from a fur trader tells how some people, on nights like these, told children that the howls were not threats but stories carried on the wind. "The wolves are singing too," they would say, turning menace into music. Perhaps that was kindness, or perhaps a deeper truth that every creature sings to the storm, humans no less than wolves. The fire crackles louder, pushing back shadows. Smoke threads upward, carrying your thoughts with it. You picture the wolves, muzzles lifted to the storm, their eyes glowing faintly in the white swirl. They too huddle for warmth. They too depend on closeness. You realize the kinship in the sound, a pack calling out against the cold, just as this family hums and breathes together inside. Scholars argue whether the presence of wolves shaped human behavior in winter. Some suggest it encouraged tighter community bonds, nightly vigilance, and respect for fire as a protective force. Others downplay their significance, insisting wolves were background noise rather than central players. Listening tonight, you wonder if the truth lies not in danger or safety, but in awareness, the constant reminder that life balanced always on a thin edge. The howling fades for a moment, swallowed by the storm. Inside, breathing steadies, shoulders relax again. You notice how quickly adaptation happens. What first startled you now feels woven into the fabric of the night. Wolves howl, snow falls, fire burns, people sleep. The rhythm continues, unbroken. You close your eyes, the sounds layering together, the hiss of snow on hides, the low growl of a dog, the faint creak of poles, and somewhere beyond, the lingering echoes of wild voices. Fear softens into understanding. The storm does not belong to you alone. Wolves too must sing to it, must endure it, must make it through the night. So you settle deeper into the firs, letting the storm and the wolves keep their duet outside while the lodge cradles you inside. Danger is real, but so is protection, and between them, sleep still comes. The wolves' voices fade into the distance, and the blizzard returns to its steady dominance. You shift, drawing the fur closer around your shoulders. The fire burns in a low ring of embers, but you are struck by something else. How every person here is already bundled like a flame unto themselves. It is well established that layered clothing was not simply day wear, but also served as nightwear in storms. There were no fluffy pajamas or quilts sewn from factory cotton. Instead, people slept in the same deerskin or elk hide garments they wore outdoors, often softened with oils so they stayed pliable. Each piece worked like an extra shield against the cold. When sleep came, you did not shed these layers, you embraced them. What might surprise you is the creativity involved. Moccasins were sometimes stuffed with dried grass before bed, acting like makeshift socks that kept toes from stiffening with frost. Children were wrapped in tiny robes, sewn from rabbit pelts, light yet astonishingly warm. And rather than one giant blanket, families piled multiple smaller hides across their bodies, so layers could be added or removed through the night depending on the fire's mood. Some anthropologists continue to argue over just how soft or comfortable these garments were. Did people enjoy the feel of buckskin that had been laboriously smoked and oiled, or did they tolerate its stiffness as part of life? Some reports describe garments supple as cloth, nearly luxurious. Others emphasize their heaviness and odor, more armor than comfort. The truth, as always, may rest somewhere in between comfort in comparison to the storm, though not without its rough edges. You lift your own arm, feeling the heft of a robe over your chest. It smells faintly of smoke and tallow, yet also of the animal from which it came, musky, earthy, like the plains themselves pressed into fabric. When you pull it tighter, you hear the faint rustle of fur against fur, a sound that whispers reassurance. A lesser-known detail is that people sometimes greased their skin before bed, rubbing fat or oil into exposed hands and faces. This acted as a barrier against the drying, biting air. You picture children squirming as mothers smeared tallow across their cheeks, the sheen glistening in firelight. It might feel strange, but in the morning their skin would not crack from the cold. A bedtime ritual both practical and oddly tender. The draft at your feet makes you grateful for those layers. You wriggle your toes inside a fur wrap, imagining the misery of bare feet against frozen ground. Here, though, warmth seeps slowly back into them, thanks to the ingenuity of clothing doubled as bedding. Some experts maintain that these layered hides and garments also shaped posture during sleep. Heavy robes and stiff furs encouraged curled positions, knees tucked, arms drawn in body heat, preserved most efficiently that way. Others believe people adapted easily, stretching when the fire was strong, curling tighter when embers waned. Either way, the storm dictated not just what you wore, but how you dreamed. The lodge smells stronger now, fur warmed by fire, leather exuding its smoky tang, human breath filling the air with a faint sweetness of life. You lean your head back, closing your eyes, and the scent of deerskin near your cheek becomes almost comforting. It is not perfume, not clean linen, but survival has its own fragrance. An unusual note from one trader describes how he awoke once to find his native host sleeping in 3 complete outfits, at once leggings, tunic, robe, and cloak stacked together while also wrapped in 2 buffalo hides. A fortress of clothing, he called it. half in awe, half in envy. You smile at the picture, a human fortress, layered like the walls of the lodge itself. The debate lingers among scholars about whether such layers led to overheating when the fire blazed too brightly. Some suggest people often woke sweating, then shifted garments aside. Others argue that fires were kept deliberately low at night to prevent that, ensuring the balance remained steady. The truth may be both, depending on the firekeeper's judgment and the storm's relentlessness. You stir slightly, noticing how the garments press against your skin, weighty yet protective. The storm claws outside, but you feel defended. Each stitch in these hides was made by careful hands, often those of women whose days were filled with scraping, softening, sewing, and decorating. The warmth you enjoy tonight was bought by their labor months before, their patience woven into every seam. The fire sighs, smoke drifting upward. You glance at the sleepers around you, their forms mounded under furs, each one a bundled mystery. Children's noses peek out, red, cheeked but content. Elders snore faintly, faces gleaming with the faint shine of oil rubbed against cold. Together, they look like figures carved from the storm itself, cloaked in the bodies of animals once hunted, now guardians of the night. You think about your own thin cotton pajamas at home and laugh softly. Against this storm, they would be a joke. Here, though, every robe, every pelt, every scrap of fur is part of an armor that doesn't clang but whispers, soft and resilient. So you draw your layers closer, tucking yourself into the cocoon that countless winters perfected. The storm can scratch and snarl, but it cannot pry beneath these hides. Sleep creeps nearer, heavy as the furs upon you, steady as the rhythm of the fire. You close your eyes, warmed by the weight of history stitched into every seam. The fire flares briefly, then settles again, and you become aware of something deeper than warmth or clothing. In the hush between wind gusts, voices rise not in song this time, but in stories. A low tone, steady and practiced, threads through the dim lodge. An elder's voice, perhaps a grandmother's, unspools a tale that seems older than the storm itself. According to many accounts from Plains tribes, storytelling was a nightly ritual, but during blizzards it became essential. It is well established that these stories distracted children from fear, passed down knowledge, and reminded everyone that even endless storms were only chapters in larger cycles. Tonight, the words fill the space like another blanket, draped across minds rather than bodies. What might surprise you is how vivid these tales were. They were not told in dry detail, but painted with gestures, sound effects, even the flicker of firelight used to mimic spirits or animals. A raised hand might become a wolf's head. A quick slap of thigh might echo hoofbeats. You imagine children wide-eyed, giggling in spite of the storm, drawn deeper into worlds that made their own hardship feel smaller. Some researchers remain divided over whether storytelling was primarily entertainment or sacred practice. Some argue that long winter nights were ideal for myths, legends, and origin stories, while others emphasize the simple need to calm restless little ones. The debate still stirs among scholars, but perhaps the answer lies in balance. Stories soothed, entertained, and taught all at once. A tale could be both a distraction from hunger and a binding rope to ancestral memory. The elder's voice rises, dips, grows gravelly when portraying a trickster, then softens when speaking as a spirit. The firelight cooperates, flaring to highlight a moment, dimming to suggest suspense. Even you lean forward unconsciously, caught in the spell. The storm outside feels briefly like part of the performance, a soundscape provided by nature itself. A lesser-known detail is that some families had storm-only stories, reserved for nights when travel was impossible. These tales might feature snow beasts, winds given personalities, or ancestors who braved similar blizzards. To tell them on calm nights would lessen their power, but in storms they were perfect mirrors of the present moment. You can almost hear one now, a spirit of snow roaring across the plains, only to be tricked by clever hunters or soothed by sacred fire. Children shift under furs, their fear replaced by fascination. One clutches a mother's sleeve, eyes wide, then laughs when the trickster in the story stumbles. Another hides under a robe during a suspenseful part, only to peek out when the elder's voice softens again. Fear, wonder, and humour mingle like ingredients in pemmican, sustaining hearts as surely as food sustains bodies. Some ethnographers suggest that these nights of shared storytelling strengthened identity more than any feast or council. Everyone listened together, learned together, laughed together. In storms where hunting was halted and journeys delayed, culture itself became the food. Others counter that stories were simply what humans always do when trapped indoors, fill silence with words. Perhaps both views are correct, but you sense the deeper weight tonight. These tales are not casual chatter, they are survival in narrative form. The lodge feels smaller as the story deepens. The storm may rage, but all eyes are on the speaker. Shadows lean closer, dogs twitch their ears, even the fire seems to pause. The tale winds toward its climax, a hunter lost in snow, a spirit guiding him home, and the listeners exhale as though they too have walked the path. Relief spreads, laughter follows, and tension evaporates like frost in morning light. One unusual observation comes from a settler who spent a storm night with a native family. He confessed he understood not a word of the language, yet found himself utterly mesmerized, lulled to sleep by the rhythm of the storyteller's voice. The storm itself seemed to hush and listen, he wrote, astonished at his own reaction. You realize you feel the same words flowing like a stream, carrying you, even if you cannot grasp every pebble on its bed. The debate endures among modern scholars about whether these tales changed in translation or remained intact across centuries. Did the arrival of outsiders alter their tone, their subjects? Or did families guard them fiercely, passing them on unchanged within the lodge walls? You suspect both. Stories adapt, yet their roots remain. And tonight, those roots hold steady against the blizzard's pull. You close your eyes, letting the cadence wash over you. The words slip into your dreams, shaping images of animals running across white plains, spirits leaning close, fires that never die. You realize the genius here. Storms that might bring despair are transformed into classrooms of memory, where every gust becomes part of a larger lesson. The elder's voice lowers, fades. A pause holds the room, then murmurs rise. Children whisper questions. Adults chuckle softly. Another tale might come, or perhaps silence now is enough. Either way, you feel fuller, steadier, wrapped not only in hides but in stories that span generations. The fire sighs, smoke drifts upward, and the storm continues to hammer. But you drift too, rocked gently by the lingering echo of the story. Fear is softened, time itself forgotten. And as sleep nudges your eyelids, you understand. In the blizzard's heart, words can be as warm as fire. The lodge grows quieter after the story, the fire's embers glowing red like watchful eyes at the center. Yet you soon realize the flames are more than heat, more than light. They carry a weight of reverence that goes beyond practicality. In the hush of the storm, you notice the way people glance toward the fire, as though acknowledging its presence as something more than wood and flame. It is well established that for many plains peoples, fire was a sacred companion. It was not simply struck for warmth, it was tended as though alive. Flames symbolized continuity, the breath of ancestors, and the link between the earthly and the spirit world. Tonight, you see that truth in the careful way, embers are coaxed, rather than roughly stirred. What might surprise you is how the fire was sometimes spoken to as if it could listen. A whispered word before adding a stick, a murmur of thanks after smoke cleared the lodge. Early visitors recorded these moments with bafflement, but to the people inside, it was as natural as speaking to a respected elder. Fire heard, fire remembered, fire protected. Some researchers remain divided on how formal these rituals were. Some accounts describe structured ceremonies around the lodge fire, prayers and offerings made with deliberate symbolism. Others believe the gestures were quieter, folded into everyday life so seamlessly that outsiders missed their depth. Perhaps both were true, varying from family to family. To you, tonight, the fire feels like both a tool and a spirit, the storm's opposite yet equal. The storm pounds again, rattling poles, but the flame responds with a crackle that feels like defiance. You lean closer, letting its glow brush your face. Shadows lengthen behind you, flickering like spirits dancing along the hides. You think of how many people before you looked into this same glow, found courage in its heartbeat, whispered hopes into its smoke. A lesser-known detail is that sometimes food or herbs were deliberately dropped into the fire not for cooking but as offerings. A pinch of fat, a sprig of sage, a few berries given to the flames with a quiet thought. The scent rose upward, mixing with storm air through the smoke hole, carrying messages skyward. You imagine the faint sweetness curling above even now, invisible yet powerful. The elder nearest the fire adjusts a stick, nudging it inward with practiced precision. Sparks leap, and the room brightens briefly. In that glow, you glimpse faces turned toward the flames, reflecting light in their eyes. For a moment, the storm vanishes. The lodge is its own world, with the fire as its Sunday. Anthropologists continue to wonder whether fire in winter lodges acted as a daily ceremony or a practical anchor that occasionally took on sacred meaning. Was every storm night a ritual, or did reverence simply intensify when conditions grew harsh? The debate endures, but perhaps the line between sacred and practical is thinner than modern thought allows. After all, what is survival itself if not holy? The air shifts, filled with smoke that curls and sighs. You inhale it, coughing faintly, but even that feels part of the rhythm. The smoke carries not only warmth but a message. We are alive, we are together, we endure. Each spark is a reminder of those truths. An unusual note from a fur trader describes how, during one particularly brutal blizzard, a family spent hours feeding tiny twigs into the fire, one at a time, murmuring words he could not translate. He thought it a prayer, though no one confirmed. What struck him was their calm. The storm might tear the world apart, but as long as the flame endured, they believed the family would too. You glance upward at the smoke hole. Snow clings around its edges, and flakes drift in, vanishing into the heat. The fire consumes them instantly, as though swallowing the storm. You can't help but see the poetry. Snow falls endlessly, fire rises endlessly, and between them life hangs suspended. The debate among scholars persists about whether these symbolic fires were ever left to burn continuously, even between camps. Some argue they were rekindled at each stop. Others suggest coals were carried carefully, wrapped in ash and hide, preserving the same flame from place to place. Imagine that. The fire you see tonight could be the child of one lit weeks or even months ago, carried across plains like a heartbeat in a pouch. The dogs stir near the entrance, one sneezing at the smoke, another curling tighter. Children murmur, half dreaming, lulled by the steady pulse of flame. Adults shift, adjusting furs, but all seem comforted by the glow. You realize that even when eyes are closed, everyone feels the fire's presence. It is a companion you do not forget. The storm shrieks outside, but the fire responds with its steady crackle. You find yourself staring into it, hypnotized. Shapes leap and vanish, faces, animals, shadows of stories told earlier. You drift in its rhythm, aware that this dance has calmed countless others before you. Fire as teacher, fire as healer, fire as memory. So you lean back, warmed not just in body but in spirit. The storm can claw and howl, but the sacred flame will answer, steady and bright. You close your eyes, whispering silently to the embers yourself, as countless others have. Guard us, hold us, carry us through the night. As the storm howls louder, the fire's glow begins to shift its rhythm, steady yet undulating, with each gust that rattles the lodge. The warmth from the flames seeps into your bones, but it's the flickering shadows that hold your attention. For just a moment, they seem to play with the walls, creating shapes that resemble faces, animals, and figures you can't quite place. In this light, everything becomes fluid, shifting. It's as if the flames themselves are alive, telling stories only the shadows know. You glance around the lodge, seeing families huddled close. The rhythmic sound of breathing fills the space, punctuated by the occasional crack of the fire or the rustle of a blanket. The temperature inside is warmer than outside, but it's not just the fire or the fur layers you notice. It's the energy of the shared space, people close enough to feel each other's breath, hear each other's whispers. The walls are thin, but they offer protection not just from the cold, but from isolation. In the heart of a storm, this connection is as vital as the fire itself. Most historical accounts agree that the teepee's design fostered this closeness. Its circular structure, combined with a single entrance and the center fire, drew everyone toward the heart of the lodge. It is well established that this physical proximity created a sense of unity, making it easier for families to endure the harsh winter storms together. The teepee was not just a shelter from the weather, it was a place for shared experience and collective resilience. What might surprise you is the profound quiet that settled in during these nights. The storm outside could roar and twist, but inside, there was often a serenity that filled the space. It wasn't stillness born of fear, but a calm acceptance of the world outside. The family gathered here, together, knowing that the lodge and the fire would keep them safe through the worst of it. An unusual detail recorded by early travelers describes the interior of the teepee on stormy nights. It wasn't just warmth that enveloped the family, but an aura of comfort created by shared stories, laughter, and even tears. The space felt less like a building and more like a living entity, one that responded to the people inside, their collective energy shaping the atmosphere. This communal spirit was vital, offering not just physical warmth, but emotional and spiritual shelter. Some anthropologists argue that this sense of shared space and shared survival was integral to the success of these families in the harsh winters. They suggest that, in a world where survival often depended on cooperation, the teepee's design reinforced the values of mutual care and closeness. By being together in one space, families could weather not just the storm outside, but the emotional and psychological strain of winter. Tonight, as the fire dims and shadows stretch across the lodge, you can almost feel the weight of history in the air. The very design of the space around you has witnessed generations of people, sitting, sleeping, laughing, and crying together as storms raged outside. It has been here, holding them, supporting them, and allowing them to rest in peace even as the world around them battled the elements. A gentle creak of the hide pulls you back from your thoughts. You adjust your position slightly, careful not to disturb the dog that is curled at your feet. Its breathing is steady, rhythmic, a quiet companion in the storm. The faintest hint of its fur scent drifts up toward you, mixing with the ever-present smell of wood smoke. You realize that the comfort in this moment isn't just about the fire or the blankets, but the subtle but powerful presence of those around you. Even the dog, in its own way, has become part of the circle of warmth. The children, now more deeply asleep, are scattered across the floor, wrapped in furs or nestled under their parents' arms. The soft rising and falling of their chests seems almost to sync with the fire's steady flicker. It's a rhythm that doesn't stop. The fire burns, the storm howls, the children sleep, and the elders keep watch. The world outside is a blur of white, but inside, life continues at its own pace, steady, unbroken. Some scholars debate whether these long nights of shared sleeping had a deeper impact on family dynamics. Did the close quarters foster stronger bonds, or did it increase the likelihood of conflict? Some suggest that the intimacy of shared space created deeper connections between family members, while others point out that the lack of privacy could sometimes lead to tension. But tonight, the bond feels undeniable. The closeness is not a burden but a gift, something that has allowed families to survive centuries of winter storms. You drift deeper into the warmth, letting the sounds around you blend into the background. The fire crackles softly, the wind rattles the hide walls, and the steady rhythm of breath fills the space. There's a peace here that is hard to define. A peace that comes from knowing that you are not alone, not just in this moment, but in all the moments that came before. An unusual observation from an early settler's account mentions that, during particularly harsh winters, the sense of community inside the teepee grew even stronger. He described it as a collective pulse, a feeling that everyone was attuned to the same survival rhythm. It's as though the family's unity, forged in the fire of necessity, was so palpable that it could be felt by anyone who entered. Tonight, you feel that pulse again, quiet but strong, holding the lodge together. The storm outside continues, its winds battering the walls with increasing intensity, but you feel a deep sense of calm. The world outside may howl and rage, but inside the lodge, a different kind of force holds sway. The bond of shared space, the warmth of a fire, the reassurance of stories, and the presence of those who have braved storms before. You close your eyes again, the familiar hum of the lodge surrounding you. You are held not just by the warmth of the fire or the layers of clothing, but by the steady rhythm of life that continues around you. The fire may fade, the storm may rage, but here, inside this lodge, you are safe, and you are not alone. The storm shows no mercy. The wind hammers, the snow presses, and the poles of the lodge groan like an old ship creaking against the sea. Yet within the hide walls, a new realization dawns on you. The storm itself has become part of the night's lullaby. It is widely acknowledged by ethnographers that people in the plains grew accustomed to the rhythms of weather, hearing not just menace but pattern. To ears that had known countless winters, the blizzard's roar was familiar music. It is well established that, over time, families learn to rest to its steady pulse. Tonight, as you lie with eyes half closed, you too begin to hear that rhythm, not a scream, but a drumbeat of snow. What might surprise you is how children were soothed by it. Accounts from travelers describe little ones who, after an initial cry of fear, would listen to the howl of the gale and fall back to sleep, as if rocked by the storm itself. For them, the sound was not foreign but expected, a cradle song whispered by nature. You listen carefully, noticing the shifts, one gust low and throaty, another high and keening. The storm sings in many voices, and oddly, you are calmed. Some researchers remain divided on whether such sounds promoted sleep or heightened anxiety. Certain diaries suggest that nights were restless, the noise too fierce to ignore. Others insist that people grew so used to the blizzard's voice that silence, when it came, felt stranger than noise. The truth is likely both. Fear at first, then acceptance, until the howling became background music of survival. A lesser-known observation is that some elders taught children to speak back to the storm, not with words of defiance, but with murmurs or chants, soft sounds that joined the howl, as if blending human and wind. This practice turned fear into participation, teaching that even in the harshest moments, one could add a voice rather than shrink in silence. You smile at the thought children whispering little chants while snow rattled the poles, turning a predator into a partner. You listen again, really listening. The sound has layers. Closest to the lodge, you hear the hiss of flakes striking hide. Beyond that, the rushing sweep of wind curling across drifts. And further still, a low mown trees bending, earth groaning under pressure. Together they form a symphony, not of comfort at first, but of constancy, like waves at a shore, like heartbeats in a chest. The storm repeats, 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 and repetition is the root of sleep. The fire pops softly, a counterpoint to the storm's song. Shadows flicker across the walls, moving with the rhythm of the gusts. Even the poles seem to play along, creaking at intervals, as though striking chords. You close your eyes, and the soundscape surrounds you fully, a natural orchestra that no silence could replace. Some anthropologists still wonder whether this adaptation to storm sound shaped cultural attitudes toward hardship. Did hearing the storm as song make endurance easier, even noble? Did it turn survival into something not merely endured, but embraced as part of life's music? There is no consensus, but tonight, lulled by the howl's rhythm, you suspect the answer is yes. One unusual anecdote from a fur trader tells of his first night in a lodge during a blizzard. He confessed he could not sleep at all, heart pounding with each gust. But when he awoke at dawn, he found the family around him still slumbering peacefully, unbothered by the noise. "They have ears tuned to snow," he wrote, half in awe. You think of that now, ears trained by generations to find peace in chaos. The children shift, sighing, their bodies heavy with sleep. An elder stirs, murmurs something you don't catch, then settles again, comforted by the same rhythm. Even the dogs, alert earlier, now stretch out, chests rising and falling in time with the wind. The storm has stopped being an intruder. It has become the lodge's heartbeat. What surprises you further is how your own body adjusts. At first you are tense, listening for danger, but gradually the storm's constancy convinces you this is not threat, this is life. Your shoulders loosen, your breath matches the gusts. The blizzard becomes your lullaby too. The debate continues among scholars about how people describe these sounds in their own words. Some translations frame them as spirits singing, others as the earth's anger. Perhaps both meanings existed, depending on the mood of the storm, the needs of the listeners. Tonight, to you, the sound is neither spirit nor wrath. It is rhythm, and rhythm, steady and repeating, is sleep's invitation. The wind rattles once more, harder this time. Snow hisses, poles groan, embers spark. Yet you are no longer startled. You are cradled. The lodge sways faintly, as though rocking you like a cradle. The storm that wanted to frighten you has become your nursemaid instead. You breathe deeply, inhaling smoke and fur, and let the sounds layer over you. Each gust is a verse, each creak a refrain, each hiss of flakes another note in the song. The storm plays on, endless, relentless, but you are part of its music now. You close your eyes, surrendering, knowing that no silence could be sweeter than this thunderous lullaby. The storm does not quit, but within the lodge, the night has taken on a softer texture. The fire hums low, and the steady rhythm of wind has settled into background music. Yet despite the blizzard's insistence, not every moment of the night is solemn. In the flicker of shadows against the hides, you notice the small movements of children who have not yet surrendered to sleep. It is widely recorded in travelers' notes that storm nights were as much about play as they were about rest, at least in the first hours. Children, confined indoors, found endless fascination in the canvas walls themselves. It is well established that they turned the teepee into a stage, their laughter echoing against the hides while the wind outside rattled and growled. What might surprise you is how inventive these games could be. One child holds a stick near the fire, waving it just far enough to cast large dancing shadows on the walls. Another claps his hands to chase those shadows across the canvas, as if hunting phantom animals. The younger ones giggle and squeal, crawling under blankets to reappear dramatically, earning hushed laughter from the adults. To them, the storm is not a threat but a backdrop for imagination. There is ongoing discussion among ethnographers about whether this play was tolerated or discouraged. Some accounts emphasize strict quiet once fires dimmed, suggesting adults needed peace and order. Others paint the opposite picture. That play was encouraged. Laughter, a defense against fear. The evidence remains mixed, perhaps because every family drew its own lines. Tonight, though, you sense indulgence. The adults smile softly, too tired to scold, glad for joy in the midst of storm. A lesser-known detail is that children sometimes use the very snow drifting inside to play. When flakes slip down the smoke hole or tiny drafts blew crystals in through seams, little hands scoop them up, marveling at their sparkle in firelight. One traveler recorded that children would try to catch flakes on their tongues, just as modern children do. Imagine that tiny bursts of wonder while wolves howled and snow threatened to bury the lodge outside. The fire crackles as one of the children tosses a sliver of wood into it, earning a soft chuckle from an elder. The flames leap, and shadows stretch taller. For a moment, the lodge is alive with flickering figures that seem to join the game-dancing spirits conjured by imagination and fire. You lean back, watching as small voices chatter and echo, blending with the steady thrum of the blizzard. Some experts argue that these moments of play were essential for maintaining resilience. In long winters, monotony and fear could easily press minds into despair. By allowing children to laugh and invent games, families reminded themselves that life was more than survival. Others counter that adults likely grew impatient, needing quiet for sleep and strength for tomorrow's tasks. Yet even in that debate, both sides acknowledge play had its place. One unusual note from a missionary describes his first night in a storm-bound lodge. Expecting silence and solemnity, he was startled when children spent an hour making shadow puppets on the hide, one pretending to be a bison, another a deer. He admitted that their laughter, though strange to his ears, filled the lodge with a warmth even fire could not create. You smile at the thought, joy as insulation, laughter as protection. The dog at your feet lifts its head, ears flicking as the children scamper, then settles again, sighing as if resigned to the noise. Adults shift on their bedding, some watching fondly, others half dozing, but none truly angry. The storm outside may be relentless, but inside, life continues with play as much as prayer. What surprises you further is how natural it feels. Even you, weary from the endless hiss of snow, find yourself smiling as shadows leap across the walls. The storm fades into background noise, drowned out by the lightness of children's voices. For a moment, you remember that survival is not only about enduring, it is about living fully, even joyfully, in the harshest moments. Some scholars debate whether these games were remembered in adulthood, shaping cultural memory. Did elders recall with fondness the nights they made shadows on hides while blizzards raged? Did such memories soften the edge of hardship in stories told later? The evidence is uncertain, but tonight, as you watch, you feel certain they would. How could a child forget laughter glowing against the dark storm? The fire dims again and gradually the energy shifts. Children tire, their voices soften, their movements slow. One crawls into a blanket, curling like a pup. Another leans against a mother's shoulder, eyes heavy, smile still faintly there. The game ends not with scolding but with the natural pull of sleep. Play fades into slumber, laughter into sighs, light into shadow. The storm continues, but inside, peace returns. Adults adjust hides, pulling warmth closer. The lodge breathes again, unified, calm. And you, still warmed by the memory of laughter, find your own eyes drifting shut. You realize then, survival in storms was not just fire and fur, not just food and prayer. It was also joy, small, fleeting, glowing like sparks in the dark. Without those sparks, perhaps endurance would be brittle. But with them, even the fiercest storm could feel less absolute. So you let yourself drift, carrying that laughter with you into dreams. The blizzard can roar, but in your memory, the shadows will still dance, and children will still laugh, bright against the storm. The laughter of children fades into deep breathing, their games dissolving into dreams. The fire hums in its cradle of embers, and the storm outside plays its endless song. In this calm, you notice another presence that is less visible but just as powerful: dreams themselves. It is well established that for many native communities, dreams were not idle nonsense but meaningful experiences. They were regarded as messages, visions, or even instructions from beyond the ordinary world. To close your eyes on a night like this, when storm and survival press so near, was to open yourself to guidance that could shape decisions by dawn. What might surprise you is how families treated the dreams that arose during blizzards with special weight. Elders believed that the heightened tension of storm nights thinned the veil between the waking world and the spirit world. Dreams of snow, animals, or ancestors were not dismissed. They were discussed, remembered, and sometimes acted upon. You imagine someone stirring awake, whispering of a vision they'd just seen, a herd moving east, or a fire burning brighter than the Sunday. Others would listen carefully, nodding, considering what such symbols meant. Some scholars remain divided over whether these dreams were regarded literally or metaphorically. Certain accounts suggest that hunters changed plans after visions of buffalo paths or warning signs. Others argue the dreams were folded into storytelling traditions, valued for teaching but not always for practical action. The line between metaphor and instruction blurs, leaving debate that continues among researchers today. A lesser-known observation comes from the writings of a fur trader who awoke to find his hosts recounting dreams at dawn. One man spoke of a white bird flying across the storm, another of his late father's voice calling from the snow. The trader, baffled, dismissed it as superstition. Yet the family treated the dreams with gravity, debating their meaning as carefully as they might discuss where to hunt. You shift on your bedding, feeling the weight of the night pressing against your eyelids. Sleep comes in waves, carrying images of its own. You imagine the dreams of those around you. A child flying above the storm, a mother weaving snow into cloth, a hunter walking across a white plain where buffalo hooves thunder silently. Dreams as survival, dreams as inheritance, dreams as maps in the dark. The storm outside amplifies the sense that something larger is speaking. Its howl feels almost like a voice, its rhythm like a chant. You begin to understand why visions born on nights like this were treated with seriousness. The natural world was not background, it was a participant, shaping what minds saw and felt. Some anthropologists argue that dream sharing strengthened community bonds. Each morning, stories of the night's visions became common property, weaving individual experiences into collective meaning. Others counter that dreams were private, shared only when profound. Likely both were true, sometimes intimate, sometimes communal, depending on the dream's weight. Tonight, you sense that even the smallest vision might be remembered at dawn, spoken softly, considered carefully. An unusual detail recorded by early missionaries describes families who placed sacred objects, medicine bundles, feathers, or carved charms near their heads while sleeping. These items were believed to guide dreams, shaping them toward clarity or protection. You glance toward one side of the lodge and see such a bundle laid neatly beside an elder. Its presence is quiet but firm, as if reminding sleep itself to be meaningful. The fire sighs, and smoke drifts upward, curling through the smoke hole. You let your eyes close, surrendering to the rhythm of the storm. Images flicker behind your eyelids, snow swirling in endless patterns, animals' eyes gleaming in the dark, voices calling from far plains. You are aware of drifting, half in the lodge, half beyond it. For a moment, you feel as though you too have joined the centuries of dreamers who sought guidance in nights like this. The debate persists among scholars about how these visions shaped history. Were migrations and hunts truly redirected by dreams? Or did families simply use dreams as one more piece of evidence when deciding what to do? The records do not agree. Yet perhaps the truth matters less than the effect. Dreams gave shape to uncertainty, offering meaning in nights when the world seemed endless and cruel. What surprises you further is how the dreams themselves seem to echo the lodge's rhythm. The blizzard howls, the fire sighs, and in your half-sleep you feel yourself moving within that same pattern. Your breath joins the storm's song, your visions join the lineage of others. Your sleep becomes not solitary but part of the community's survival. A dog shifts beside you, tail thumping softly against the mat, perhaps dreaming of hunts of its own. Children murmur in their sleep, lips forming half-words. Elders stir, sigh, then settle again. The lodge is a chamber of dreams, each sleeper weaving their own thread, yet all tied together by the storm's loom. You exhale slowly, letting the images swirl without fear. Dreams are not intrusions, but invitations. They may not all be understood, but each carries meaning, each a whisper that survival is more than bodies enduring. It is minds reaching beyond the storm. So you let yourself drift fully now, into dreams that feel less like illusions and more like conversations. The storm roars, the fire breathes, and visions flicker behind your eyes. You surrender to them, knowing they too are part of the night's shelter. The lodge is thick with sleep, yet a few subtle movements remind you that not everyone inside is human. At your feet, warmth presses firmly against your ankles. You glance down and find a dog curled tight, nose tucked under its tail, its fur rising and falling with steady breath. The storm claws at the walls, but the presence of this animal brings another kind of comfort, familiar, instinctive, almost ancient. It is well established that dogs were constant companions in plains camps, valued not only for hauling burdens and guarding perimeters, but for their warmth in long winter nights. Families didn't push them aside when storms hit. They invited them into the lodge, where their thick coats and loyal bodies became part of the night's insulation. What might surprise you is how deeply these animals integrated into the rhythm of family life. Children slept beside them like siblings, pulling tails over their hands or resting against shaggy flanks. Elders sometimes leaned their backs to dogs' steady heat, and hunters, who relied on them during the day, trusted them at night to alert the lodge to prowling threats. The companionship was practical, yes, but also tender. Some historians remain divided about the exact role of dogs before the arrival of horses transformed the plains. Some argue that dogs were primarily beasts of burden, pulling travois and carrying loads. Others emphasize their role as spiritual companions and guardians of the lodge. The truth likely spans both views. They carried weight in the day, and by night they carried the heavier load of comfort. A lesser-known observation recorded in a trader's diary describes how dogs, when welcomed into the lodge, would sometimes burrow directly beneath blankets or hides with the children. "A more faithful quilt than any fabric," he wrote, half envious, half amused. You picture it now, two small figures and one furry body tangled together, indistinguishable in the fire's dim glow. The dog at your feet shifts, stretching briefly before curling tighter. Its warmth seeps into your legs, a steady flow that no fire could provide so directly. You realize that in a storm where every degree of heat matters, this shared body warmth could mean the difference between comfort and misery. An unusual account from a missionary mentions that dogs were sometimes believed to sense spirits more keenly than humans. Their sudden growls or restless pacing at night might be interpreted not just as warnings of wolves, but as signs of unseen presences. Tonight, when the dog at your feet lifts its head suddenly, ears pricked, you feel the hairs rise on your arms too. It listens a moment, then settles again, as though deciding whatever it heard was not a threat worth rousing others for. The fire pops, sending sparks upward. The dog sighs, and its breath smells faintly of meat from scraps fed earlier. That smell mixes with smoke and tallow, another thread in the night's dense tapestry. You lean down, brushing your fingers through its fur coarse on the back, softer beneath. It doesn't stir, but you feel a faint vibration of trust in its stillness. Some anthropologists argue that this closeness between people and dogs was more than companionship. It was partnership, each species relying on the other in equal measure. Others caution against over-romanticizing, pointing out that dogs were also sometimes eaten in times of famine. The debate continues, but both realities may have existed, woven into the same survival-driven fabric: love, reliance, and sacrifice, all intertwined. What surprises you further is how much calmer you feel with the dog beside you. The storm is no less fierce, the cold no less sharp, yet the presence of this creature eases tension. It reminds you that survival has never been purely human. From the first fires onward, people and animals have endured together. Tonight, that truth rests against your legs, breathing steadily, warming you wordlessly. The children stir in their sleep, one rolling closer to another dog curled near the fire. Their hands find fur instinctively, their faces relax. The animals do not move. They seem to understand their role in the storm's long hours. Guardians, companions, heaters, dream partners. Some scholars debate whether this bond with dogs shaped cultural values of loyalty and kinship. Did living side by side with creatures who guarded, hauled, and warmed families reinforce ideals of cooperation and trust? Or did dogs simply fit into existing structures of survival? The question lingers, but as you lie here tonight, the answer feels obvious. Kinship is born not only of blood, but of shared nights like this. The storm hammers harder, snow piling high, but you feel secure. The dog beside you growls softly once, then falls quiet again. Its ears twitch, its body stays pressed close. You close your eyes, grateful for its warmth, grateful for its silent watch. You realize then, survival here is layered hides. Fire, snow, clothing, stories, dreams, and yes, even dogs. Each piece alone might not suffice, but together they create a whole greater than the storm. You reach down once more, hand brushing the thick fur, and whisper a silent thanks. The dog sighs, as if in answer, and sleep comes more easily. So you drift off again, storm raging outside, dog curled tight beside you, and know this: companionship is its own kind of fire. The dog's warmth anchors you, but as the lodge creaks and the wind growls, another truth emerges. People here never truly slept unarmed. Your gaze drifts toward the edges of the lodge, where shadows half conceal objects laid deliberately close to hand bows leaning against poles, knives resting within reach, spears propped neatly. In the soft glow of embers, they look like silent guardians standing among the sleepers. It is well documented in explorers' journals that weapons were never stored far away, especially during storm seasons. It is well established that danger came not only from the weather, but from animals, raiders, or accidents when shelters strained under snow. To rest without tools of defense would have been unthinkable. A lodge might be a sanctuary, but it was never a fortress of stone. Readiness was part of survival. What might surprise you is how ordinary these weapons seemed in daily life. A bow was not only a hunter's tool, but a pillow-side object, like how you might keep a flashlight near your bed today. Knives were handled as routinely as spoons, never glamorized, simply necessary. During storms, when wolves circled or rival bands might exploit weakened camps, such vigilance meant that even in sleep, protection lay at arm's length. Some historians remain divided about whether these weapons were primarily meant for defense against wild animals or for human threats. Certain records emphasize wolves and bears prowling near camps, while others suggest that raids and skirmishes were more pressing fears. Both likely held truth, and storms, which disoriented travelers and hunters alike, created moments of vulnerability when readiness mattered most. A lesser-known detail noted by a fur trader tells of a night when a buffalo calf, panicked by the storm, blundered directly into a camp. Sleepers leapt awake, weapons in hand, thinking danger had breached the lodge. When they discovered it was only a calf, they laughed. But the fact remained. Every hand had reached for a bough before they even opened their eyes. Reflex, not hesitation, was survival. The glow of embers casts long shadows across the blades and shafts. You study their simple beauty, the curve of wood, the gleam of stone, the sinew bindings that hold them tight. Each is a product of labor, care, and tradition. A knife is not just a tool, it is a legacy of countless hours spent chipping flint, smoothing bone, sharpening edges. To see them resting now is to see centuries of knowledge leaning silently against the lodge wall. An unusual account from a missionary describes children practicing with tiny bows even inside lodges when storms kept them from outdoor games. Arrows tipped with softened wood or bone bounced harmlessly against hides. drawing chuckles from parents who tolerated the noise. "They must be ready even in play," the missionary noted, half critical, half impressed. You picture it now, children aiming at flickering shadows, training their hands while storms raged. Some anthropologists argue that this constant presence of weapons blurred the line between war and peace. To outsiders, it might have looked like paranoia, but to those who lived here, it was simple pragmatism. The storm never asked permission, predators never announced themselves, and survival demanded preparation. Others counter that the weapons carried deep symbolic value as well. Objects of identity, reminders of lineage, proof of skill. You shift slightly on your bedding, aware of the comfort in knowing that such tools are near. Even though the lodge is quiet, you feel the aura of readiness humming in the air. Sleep here is not helplessness. It is trust in both the people beside you and the weapons within reach. The storm lashes harder, and you imagine wolves nosing at snowdrifts, their howls muted by the wind, or perhaps rival scouts somewhere in the distance waiting for weakness. The thought is chilling, but then you glance again at the bows, the knives, the spears, and understand why no one inside stirs in panic. Preparedness itself is comfort. What surprises you further is how this atmosphere does not feel tense. The weapons do not radiate aggression, but steadiness. They are not there to start conflict, but to end fear. Like the fire, like the dogs, like the hides themselves, they are part of the layered defense that makes sleep possible. A scholar once wrote that the teepee at night is both cradle and armory. Tonight, you understand exactly what he meant. Babies sleep inches from sharpened stone. Elders dream beside spears taller than themselves. And yet all is calm. The tools do not disturb rest. They enable it. The fire sighs, casting one last spark upward. A man near the entrance stirs, hand brushing the shaft of a spear before he settles again. The gesture is automatic, unconscious, like pulling a blanket higher. You realize then that readiness itself is a lullaby when danger is expected. It ceases to paralyze. The storm continues, merciless, but you close your eyes knowing the balance is kept. Around you are hides, furs, family, dogs and fire. And within reach, the sharp edge of human resilience. Sleep comes again, steady and sure, guarded by more than walls. The lodge has settled into its slow rhythm, fire whispering, sleepers breathing, storm growling. Yet in the dimness your eyes drift toward another presence besides weapons or dogs. Near the bedding of an elder, you notice a small bundle wrapped carefully in cloth and tied with leather thongs. It rests not far from where the elder's head meets the mat, almost like a pillow of secrets. It is well established that medicine bundles held deep importance in many native cultures. These were not casual collections of herbs or trinkets, but sacred objects carrying prayers, memories, and powers of protection. Each bundle was unique, sometimes containing stones, feathers, claws, bits of root, or personal items tied to visions and ceremonies. To keep such a bundle close during sleep was to invite its guardianship into dreams. What might surprise you is how personal these bundles were. No two were alike, and their contents were rarely shared openly. Some were family bundles, passed down across generations, while others were deeply individual, created after a vision quest or sacred encounter. On nights when storms raged, to place one beside the pillow was to draw a circle of unseen strength around the sleeper. Some scholars continue to debate whether these bundles were primarily spiritual shields or practical kits. Certain records emphasize their role in ritual and prayer. Others note that they often contained herbs used to treat coughs, fevers, or frostbite, tools of healing as well as faith. The reality, as with much else, likely blended both. Medicine for the body and the spirit tied together in one small package. A lesser-known observation from an early explorer recalls entering a lodge where every sleeper had something laid near their heads, some simple feathers, others elaborate wrappings. When he asked about them, his hosts refused to explain in detail, saying only that they were for protection. He left baffled, but what he witnessed was a community of sleepers, each guarded by unseen allies. You glance again at the bundle near the elder. Its cloth glimmers faintly in firelight, edges frayed from years of touch. You wonder what rests inside. Perhaps a stone from a river, smooth and cool. Perhaps dried sage wrapped in hide. Perhaps something no outsider would ever guess. The mystery itself feels powerful. An unusual anecdote comes from a missionary who once described storms where families sprinkled a pinch of tobacco or herbs onto embers before lying down, invoking the bundle's spirit to carry prayers into the smoke. Tonight, you can almost smell that faint sweetness curling above the fire, mingling with the storm air. Some anthropologists argue that these objects provided psychological comfort, anchoring families against the terror of winter nights. Others insist their power was seen as literal, shaping events and shielding sleepers from harm. The debate remains unresolved, but perhaps both perspectives miss the simplest truth. Meaning itself can be medicine. To believe in protection is to feel safer, and in a storm, that safety is priceless. The dog beside you shifts, tail brushing your leg. Its warmth and watchfulness feel tangible, but the bundle by the elder's head feels intangible, a warmth of another kind. You realize that survival here is not just about hides, fire, or food, it is also about spirit. To endure endless winters, people fortified both body and soul. What surprises you further is how naturally these layers coexist. A knife for defense, a fur for warmth, a bundle for protection, they do not contradict each other. They weave together, forming a web strong enough to hold sleep steady even as the storm claws outside. The elder stirs, perhaps sensing your gaze. He touches the bundle lightly with one hand before turning onto his side, a gesture both tender and instinctive. You understand then. It is not superstition but relationship. Just as children lean into parents and dogs curl beside sleepers, so too do people rest against the unseen guardians of their bundles. The fire pops, throwing sparks upward. Smoke swirls, carrying with it prayers whispered earlier. You inhale deeply, feeling the blend of scents: wood, hide, tallow, and something faintly herbal, as though the bundle itself perfumes the air. Some researchers speculate that dreams themselves were believed to be shaped by these objects. To sleep beside a bundle was to invite visions aligned with healing or guidance. Did hunters dream of herds because of stones tied to buffalo hunts? Did mothers dream of ancestors because feathers brushed their faces at night? No one can prove it, but the possibility lingers like smoke in the rafters. You close your eyes, imagining what your own bundle might hold if you lived here. Perhaps a small river stone, cool and grounding. Perhaps a feather found after a long walk. Perhaps even a scrap of hide from a dog who curled faithfully at your feet. Objects simple in appearance but heavy with meaning. The storm hammers once more, snow slamming against the walls, but the lodge holds steady. Around you lie people wrapped not only in furs but in faith. You realize that while the fire warms bodies, it is these quiet bundles that warm the unseen spaces, hearts, minds, spirits. So you shift onto your side, listening as the wind shrieks and the poles groan. The bundle near the elder does not move, yet its presence fills the room as surely as the fires glow. You close your eyes, steadied by that invisible protection. Sleep gathers you again, layered with warmth both tangible and unseen. The storm may test hides and poles, but it cannot breach the circle drawn by objects of meaning, kept close beside pillows, tied to the spirit of survival. The storm's fury begins to loosen its grip as dawn inches closer. You sense it before you see it. The wind softens, the rattling against the hides becomes less frantic, and the snow seems to fall in gentler sheets rather than in blinding walls. Inside the lodge, sleepers stir. The night has been endured, and now morning rituals wait. It is well documented that many Plains families began each day, even after the harshest nights, with acts of gratitude. It is well established that elders would rise first, tending the fire, and offering quiet thanks to the spirits who had guarded the family through the storm. This was not ceremony for show, but an instinctive rhythm recognition that survival itself was a gift. What might surprise you is how practical and spiritual blended seamlessly in these mornings. While one elder added wood to the embers, another might whisper a prayer. While a mother adjusted hides to let in new air, she might also speak softly to the fire, acknowledging its persistence through the night. Gratitude and maintenance were the same act. Some anthropologists remain divided about whether these practices were formal rituals or informal habits passed down naturally. Some argue that set prayers and gestures marked each dawn, while others suggest that gratitude was spontaneous, shaped by individual families. The truth may be that both occurred, a mixture of ritual and instinct, varied by circumstance and tribe. A lesser-known account from a fur trader describes waking to see snow packed tightly around a lodge, nearly burying it, only for the inhabitants to step outside laughing, stretching arms to the sky. They greeted the sun as a friend, he wrote, astonished by their calm after such violence. You picture that moment now, the relief, the joy of seeing light after a night that could have ended so differently. Inside, the lodge stirs. A woman stokes the embers, coaxing flame back to life. The crackle sounds like a sigh of relief, as though the fire itself is grateful. Children blink awake, rubbing smoke from their eyes, asking softly if the storm is gone. The dogs stretch, shake themselves, and sniff the air for signs of change. The elder who slept near the medicine bundle sits upright now, placing a hand on the cloth before lifting his eyes. His lips move silently, words too soft for you to catch, but the gesture is unmistakable. He is acknowledging the night's protection, returning thanks before the day begins. You realize how profoundly such rituals must shape resilience. To start each morning with gratitude, even after hardship, is to affirm strength rather than weakness. An unusual note from missionaries mentions that some mornings after storms, families deliberately stepped outside barefoot for a moment, placing their feet on snow to greet the earth awake. The practice shocked outsiders, but its symbolism is clear, acknowledging connection to the land even in its harshest form. Whether common or rare, the idea lingers, gratitude expressed not only in words, but in direct touch with the world that sustains and tests them. Some scholars continue to debate whether these morning rituals were primarily religious or psychological. Did they invoke spirits literally, or did they simply serve to calm minds, offering order after chaos? The debate may never be resolved, but perhaps it doesn't need to be. Survival often depends less on categories and more on practice. Gratitude, whether to spirits or to life itself, steadies the heart. You imagine stepping outside now, feeling the snow crunch underfoot, the silence of dawn muffled by deep drifts. The horizon glows faintly pink, light reflecting off endless white. The storm has left behind stillness, the kind that feels almost sacred. After the roar of the night, the quiet itself seems like an answered prayer. Back inside, food is fetched from overhead bundles, pemmican, dried meat, perhaps a pinch of berries, simple sustenance to start the day. Children nibble sleepily, still wrapped in furs. Adults chew with quiet patience, their minds already on tasks, checking drifts, clearing paths, scouting for fallen poles. Yet even as they prepare for work, they pause to laugh softly, to speak in low tones, to remind each other they are still here. What surprises you further is how little despair remains. The storm may have stolen hours of rest, may have left dangerous snowbanks, but the mood is not defeat. Instead, it is a kind of defiance softened by gratitude. They lived through the night, and that fact alone reshapes the day. You glance toward the smoke hole. Light trickles in now, golden and pale. The air inside shifts with it, no longer heavy with endless darkness. Snow still presses around the base, but the storm's voice has grown faint, distant. Inside, the lodge breathes easier. An unusual traveler once wrote that he could never understand why people smiled so broadly at dawn after storms, until he endured one himself. Then he realized morning was not guaranteed, light was not owed. Each sunrise felt like a victory, a reminder that storms may rage, but they do not last forever. The elder rises fully now, his bundle tucked carefully away. Others follow, adjusting clothes, stretching limbs, muttering quietly. Outside, the world waits, hushed under snow. But inside, the day begins with fire rekindled, food shared, gratitude spoken. So you stretch too, warmed by the recognition that life has endured another storm. You feel the lodge's quiet strength, the resilience of its people, and the rhythm of rituals that anchor them through hardship. The storm is never the end. It is simply another verse in the song of survival, always followed by dawn. The storm has passed, yet its mark lingers. Inside the lodge, warmth returns with the morning fire, but your nose catches another, less pleasant detail, the sour tang of damp hides and the acrid whiff of garments drying over the flames. The night's blizzard left its toll. Snow crept in through seams. Cloaks froze stiff during late errands. And now everything must be restored before wearers venture back into the white silence. It is well established that clothing, especially hides and furs, could not simply be left wet. Moisture in the fibers turned them rigid as boards, useless for movement and painful against the skin. Families learned to lay their garments carefully near fires after storms, shifting them often so they dried evenly without scorching. This ritual of drying was as essential to survival as food itself. What might surprise you is the patience it required. Too close to the fire, and the hide could shrink, curl, or even ignite. Too far, and it remained damp, freezing again as soon as it left the lodge. Adults sat cross-legged, stretching pieces out with wooden sticks or even their hands, turning them slowly, speaking in quiet voices while steam rose in faint, ghostly ribbons. The lodge filled with that unmistakable smell, wet leather turning warm, like a tannery inside your dreams. Some historians still debate how much time this task consumed on long, stormy mornings. Certain accounts claim drying clothes could take hours, forcing families to delay hunting or travel. Others suggest people developed tricks oiling hides before storms, layering furs to protect inner garments, so drying was quicker than outsiders realized. The truth likely lies in between. Some mornings were long and tedious, others more efficient thanks to careful preparation. A lesser-known detail comes from an explorer who described the sound of this drying ritual. A lodge alive with hissing, snowmelt dripping into the embers, hides steaming, the crackle of wood, all blended into a symphony of recovery. You listen now, hearing that same faint hiss as droplets fall from a cloak hung near the fire. The smell is sharp, smoky, unforgettable. One unusual observation from traders mentions that children were often tasked with holding smaller garments, mittens, moccasins, scarves near the flames, learning patience as they shifted the pieces carefully. More than one young hand earned a quick scolding for dropping fur too close and leaving a singe mark. Yet these lessons mattered. Learning how to dry garments properly could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. Some anthropologists argue that this ritual was more than maintenance. It was morning therapy. After a night of relentless howling, the sight of steam lifting off hides reminded families that recovery was possible. Others counter that it was simply necessity, nothing more. But sitting here, watching as coats soften again and cloaks regain flexibility, you sense both truths. The task is survival, but it is also reassurance. The storm may soak and freeze, but fire and patience undo its grip. You watch as one woman carefully lays a buffalo robe across a pole, stretching it taut, smoothing its edges. Her hands move with practiced rhythm, each gesture one she has performed 100 times. She hums softly as she works, the tune blending with the hiss of drying hides. A child nearby mimics her motions, holding up a small pair of moccasins and turning them with exaggerated care. The adults chuckle quietly, but the child's lesson is real. The smell thickens wet fur, smoke, tallow. You wrinkle your nose, but then realize how comforting it must be to those inside. Each garment that dries is another shield restored, another piece of armor ready for the next venture outside. Without them, the storm still holds victory. With them, the people are once more prepared. What surprises you further is how communal the task feels. No one dries their clothing in isolation. All garments are spread around the central fire, shared space for shared survival. Children dart in to check their pieces. Elders mutter advice. Dogs nose curiously at dripping edges. It is as though the entire family participates in this quiet ritual of restoration. An account from a missionary mentions how striking it was to see gratitude even in this act. Families, he said, often murmured thanks not only to the fire but to the animals whose hides and furs now kept them alive. Drying was not merely about preparing clothing, it was about renewing a bond. Each pelt, each robe, was once a living being, and its gift was remembered as steam rose in the lodge. Some scholars debate whether such respect was truly constant or partly romanticized by later observers. Did people always pause to honor the animals, or was it occasional, depending on circumstance? The records differ, yet as you watch the gentle way a robe is stretched, as if caressing rather than merely handling, you feel the reverence is genuine. The fire burns hotter now, coaxing more steam into the air. The lodge feels damp, heavy, filled with both the stench of wet fur and the sweetness of smoke. Yet there is progress. Garments that were stiff are supple again, ready for another day. Adults exchange satisfied glances. Children pull warm moccasins back onto their feet, wriggling their toes in delight. The storm outside has left its mark, but inside, resilience answers. Wet hides become dry, frozen coats become pliable, and spirits rise with each garment restored. The process is slow, perhaps tedious, but it is also proof that storms can be undone not in grand gestures, but in steady, patient care. So you breathe deeply, letting the scent of smoke and drying leather settle into you. The storm has passed, the fire has endured, and now the lodge repairs what the night tried to break. You close your eyes, warmed by the knowledge that survival is not just about enduring storms but about mending afterward, garment by garment, task by task, until life feels whole again. The garments are nearly dry now, steam fading from the hides. But another concern quickly takes its place. The woodpile near the fire is visibly smaller, each log a treasure that has burned into ash. You realize that warmth is not endless each night, consumes resources, and in winter storms, gathering more is no simple errand. It is well established that on the open plains, especially in regions where trees were sparse, firewood was scarce. Families relied not only on fallen branches or driftwood along rivers, but also on less obvious fuels. Buffalo chips, dried dung collected from the herds, were an everyday necessity. Far from being disgusting, they burned hot, steady, and smoke-light, making them valuable especially when wood was gone. What might surprise you is the sheer effort required to keep supplies ready. Children and women often gathered dung during warmer months, drying it carefully and storing it in heaps near camp. Hunters sometimes carried a bundle of it even on journeys, ensuring fire could be sparked when no timber grew. Imagine your own survival, depending not on neat cords of wood, but on humble, sun-baked patties stacked like bricks of gold. Some historians remain divided over how plentiful fuel truly was. Certain diaries describe endless shortages, with families shivering through long nights when storms made gathering impossible. Others insist that careful planning and seasonal migration kept camps well supplied. The truth may lie somewhere between, some winters bountiful, others unforgiving depending on terrain and timing. A lesser-known detail from a trader's journal describes how buffalo chips were sometimes prized enough to trade between camps. One man recorded giving away beads in exchange for a bundle of dried dung during a blizzard, chuckling at the irony yet fully grateful for its worth. To laugh and to survive both possible at once. The fire sputters slightly as a thin stick is tossed in. You can feel the tension. Every ember is precious. Adults eye the dwindling pile, weighing choices. Should they risk stepping out into snowdrifts to gather what little the storm left? Or wait, conserving what they have until the sun reveals more? You sense the calculation behind every decision. An unusual observation noted by a missionary tells of families teaching children to ration fire as carefully as food. Do not make it roar when it only needs to whisper, they would say. Tonight, you hear the whisper clearly. The fire burns low, enough to warm but not wasteful. The patience required to resist feeding it lavishly is remarkable, yet necessary. Some anthropologists argue that this discipline shaped cultural attitudes toward resource use. Nothing was squandered. Every scrap had purpose. Others suggest it was simply practicality born of need. Yet watching the fire now, burning just high enough to keep sleepers comfortable, you feel it was both a mindset and a necessity. Efficiency itself became tradition. The smell of burning dung joins the tapestry of scents in the lodge. It is dry, earthy, almost sweet in its way, not unpleasant, just different from wood. To modern noses it might seem strange, but to those here, it is the scent of survival. You breathe it in, realizing how much the body can adapt, how smells tied to life become cherished. What surprises you further is the creativity people showed when supplies ran low. Some accounts describe mixing dung with bits of bark or even animal fat to make it burn longer. Others mention carefully banking embers under ash at night so they could be revived at dawn without wasting new fuel. Each trick stretched resources further, each adjustment proof of ingenuity. The fire flares briefly as another piece is added, then calms again. Families glance at it, satisfied, then turn back to their tasks. Children no longer play. They help carry small sticks or chips from storage, learning the importance of each handful. The dogs sniff curiously, then curl back to rest. Life continues, balance between scarcity and resilience. Scholars debate whether scarcity of firewood drove broader patterns of migration. Some argue winter camps were chosen primarily for fuel access, while others emphasize hunting grounds or shelter from wind. Likely all factors intertwined: food, fuel, protection, each weighed carefully before poles were set. The land dictated survival, and families listened. You stretch, feeling the warmth on your skin, conscious now of its cost. Each flicker of flame carries the memory of hours spent gathering, drying, carrying. Each ember is labor transformed. You understand why people guarded fires as if alive, why sparks were treated as sacred. To waste them was to waste time, effort, and the promise of life itself. The storm outside may be quieter, but snow still drifts, burying paths, making new gathering difficult. Inside, though, the fire holds. Its flame is smaller but steady, a heartbeat of discipline and care. You close your eyes, listening to the soft crackle, smelling the faintly sweet smoke, and realize that warmth here is not taken for granted, it is earned. So you settle deeper into your furs, grateful for every ember, every chip, every stick that keeps the storm's teeth from sinking deeper. The lodge breathes on, warmed by resources gathered months ago, rationed carefully, burned wisely. And you drift into half-sleep again, knowing that survival is not only about bravery, it is about patience and the careful tending of flame. The storm has eased, but in its wake lies another challenge: silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you realize how vast and empty the snow-covered plains have become. You pull the fur tighter, not from cold now, but from the strange weight of stillness. The fire crackles softly, dogs shift in their sleep, and outside the world lies buried. It is well established that after blizzards, the land could appear almost alien. Trails disappeared, familiar landmarks vanished under drifts, and camps seemed isolated on floating islands of snow. To step outside in such stillness was to feel adrift in a frozen sea, cut off from the wider world. Families knew that the storm was over, yet the work of reorienting had just begun. What might surprise you is how people adapted to this disorienting quiet. Some families sent scouts as soon as the winds calmed, not to hunt, but simply to re-establish direction. Snow erased paths so completely that without markers, stones, tree groves, or remembered shapes of hills, travel could become dangerously confusing. In such mornings, even the most experienced hunters paused, studying the horizon carefully before taking a single step. Historians still argue over whether families deliberately created snow markers during storms to guide their way after. Some accounts mention poles stuck upright in drifts, serving as anchors when the world turned blank. Others suggest people relied solely on memory and intuition, trusting in the landmarks hidden beneath snow. The debate continues, but either way, survival depended on an ability to read the land even when it seemed erased. A lesser-known detail comes from an explorer who described the muffled quality of sound after storms. He wrote that his own footsteps seemed swallowed, voices carried strangely, and even the crack of a branch felt muted. To him, it was eerie. To the people who lived here, however, it was simply another voice of the land, a reminder that storms reshaped not only sight but sound itself. Inside the lodge, you feel the tension of this silence settling in. Adults stir, preparing to step outside, while children cling to blankets, reluctant to leave the cocoon of warmth. Dogs whine softly, impatient to sniff the world beyond the walls. The elder near the fire stretches, bones cracking like the poles overhead. Soon, the entrance flap will be pushed open, and light will pour in. An unusual account from a fur trader describes the first breath of air after a blizzard as sharp as glass, yet strangely sweet. He marveled that even exhausted families stepped out smiling, inhaling deeply as though tasting survival itself. You imagine that now? The crisp sting of frozen air, the faint scent of pine smoke drifting from other lodges, the overwhelming whiteness that blinds and dazzles at once. Some anthropologists argue that these mornings carried spiritual weight, that stepping into a storm-cleansed world was seen as renewal, the earth washed and remade. Others caution against overinterpretation, insisting it was practical reality. Families had to check snowdrifts, dig out supplies and plan the day. Perhaps both are true renewal and necessity woven into one gesture. The flap stirs, and a shaft of light slices into the dim lodge. Snow glare bounces off the hide walls, harsh yet beautiful. A man pushes his way out, boots crunching into the drift. You picture the sight from his eyes, endless white, the horizon smeared in pale blue, the sky impossibly wide. The storm has passed, but its silence remains, a vast stage waiting for the next act of survival. What surprises you further is how quickly activity begins. Adults shovel snow from the lodge's base, clearing ventilation, preventing collapse. Children help by stamping small paths, turning drifts into trails. Dogs leap joyfully, their bodies made for such conditions, vanishing in plumes of powder before bursting out again. Life reasserts itself against the silence. An unusual note from missionaries mentions that laughter often accompanied this work. Instead of despair at the labor, families treated it as routine, even playful. Snowballs were thrown, children slid down drifts, and adults smiled at the antics. The silence of the storm's aftermath became filled with sound again, not of threat, but of living voices. Some scholars debate whether this light-heartedness was common or a romantic memory preserved by outsiders. Did laughter truly follow every storm, or were some mornings grim with hunger and fatigue? The records differ, yet as you imagine the dogs bounding, the children shouting, and adults smiling despite the work, you sense that joy was not rare. It was another tool for survival. You close your eyes briefly, feeling the brightness of snow even through the hide walls. The lodge smells still of smoke and fur, but the air carries a new freshness now, creeping in through the flap. You inhale deeply, tasting it sharp, sweet, undeniable. The silence is broken by footsteps, voices, the scraping of poles freed from snow. Life continues. The fire inside is fed again, flames leaping higher as more wood and dung are added. Its light feels less desperate now, more companionable. You stretch under your furs, realizing that the hardest part of the storm is over. The silence has been acknowledged, broken, reshaped into the sounds of recovery. So you let your body relax once more, lulled by the rhythm of activity, reassured by the laughter carried faintly through the flap. The storm's silence has passed, and in its place rises the music of survival, boots crunching, dogs barking, voices calling. You drift towards sleep again, knowing that even the quiet aftermath of a blizzard becomes part of life's endless cycle. The sun, faint but steady, climbs higher, and its light turns the snowdrifts outside into glittering waves. Yet the brightness does not erase the deeper worry pressing on every family's mind: food. The storm may have ended, but its aftermath has buried hunting trails, scattered herds, and silenced the movements of animals. Inside the lodge, you feel the shift in mood. Laughter softens, tasks grow purposeful, and thoughts turn toward what will fill bellies today. It is well established that after blizzards, hunting could be nearly impossible for days. Deep drifts slowed every step, while prey animals hunkered down in shelter, invisible against white plains. Families relied heavily on stores: pemmican, dried meat, nuts, corn, or whatever trade goods they had secured before the storm. Without those preparations, hunger set in quickly. What might surprise you is how resourceful families became in stretching these supplies. Pemmican, already dense and long-lasting, was sometimes boiled into soups, thinned with snowmelt, and shared among many. Even a small scrap could flavor a pot large enough to sustain everyone. Children were taught early to savor every bite, never wasting, never taking more than needed. You picture the steaming pot now, bubbling faintly above the fire, carrying a fragrance of smoke and fat that feels comforting even in scarcity. Some scholars continue to debate whether blizzards caused real famine or simply temporary hunger. Diaries from traders describe families reduced to chewing on hides when storms lasted too long. Others argue that careful planning combined with mobility usually kept starvation at bay. The truth may lie in extremes: some winters merciful, others merciless. Survival balanced on how many herds had been found in seasons past. A lesser-known account describes families cracking open frozen marrow bones after storms, roasting them lightly and sharing the rich fat. The children's faces gleamed with grease, one observer noted, and though it was little, it was feast enough. You imagine that moment? Fire popping, hands greasy, laughter breaking through tension for a while as marrow warmed hungry bellies. The lodge smells of cooking now. Someone stirs a pot slowly, the liquid thick with dissolved pemmican. Children sit up straighter, drawn by the scent. Dogs sniff eagerly, tails thumping, though they know their portion will come only after the people have eaten. Hunger sharpens every sense. An unusual note from a missionary describes how even in these moments of scarcity, families often set aside a tiny share as offering tossed into the fire or placed outside for spirits or animals. To outsiders, it seemed wasteful. To the people inside, it was essential. Giving back ensured balance, even when little remained. The act itself reminded everyone that survival was not only about hoarding, but about respect. Some anthropologists argue that this attitude helped maintain psychological resilience. To give when hungry may seem foolish, but it reframed the moment. Hunger was not defeat, but part of a relationship with land, animals, and unseen guardians. Others suggest the practice was simply tradition, followed regardless of reason. Either way, the ritual gave meaning to scarcity, softening its bite. You watch as bowls are filled, small portions, carefully measured. Children receive theirs first, then elders, then the rest. Each person eats slowly, savoring every mouthful. Conversation is quiet, but not grim. There is even a murmur of humor as someone jokes about the wolves outside wishing for a taste. Laughter flickers, brief, but real. Hunger does not erase humanity. It sharpens it. What surprises you further is the patience of the children. No tantrums, no grabbing. They eat as taught, knowing that storms always test patience, that plenty and hunger both come and go. Survival is not about indulgence, but about balance. The discipline of food sharing is as much part of culture as stories or songs. An unusual story from a trader recalls being astonished when a family invited him to share their last scraps during a blizzard. He wrote, "They fed me though they themselves had little, and I knew I would have perished without them." Hospitality, even in hunger, remained a core value. You sense that same spirit here. The pot is not guarded, but shared, each bowl handed without resentment. The debate continues among historians about whether outsiders exaggerated the severity of winter hunger to highlight their own resilience. Some records seem dramatic, painting families as perpetually starving. Others downplay hardship, suggesting skill and planning usually prevailed. As you sit within this lodge, you sense the truth is textured. Hunger came in degrees, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but always present in memory, always shaping behavior. The fire warms the pot again, steam curling upward. The smell lingers in the air, filling the lodge with a promise of energy. Children lick their bowls, dogs wait patiently for scraps. Adults stretch, fed enough to face the day. Hunger may not vanish, but neither will determination. You lean back, realizing that storms test not only hides and poles but also discipline. To eat carefully, to share equally, to respect even when hungry, these acts keep communities whole. Without them, no lodge could endure a winter. So you close your eyes once more, warmed by the taste of imaginary broth, comforted by the smell of food in the air, steady in the knowledge that hunger has been faced before and will be faced again, always with resilience. The storm may take much, but it cannot take the will to share, to endure, and to wait for the herds to return. The bowls are licked clean, the pot scraped until only a thin glaze of fat remains on its sides. Hunger has been dulled for now, though not erased. As you shift under your furs, you realize the next pressing task is not only about food or fuel, it is about finding your way again. Storms are not just walls of snow. They are erasers, wiping paths, covering landmarks, and leaving the world strange and new by morning. It is well established that the plains could become unrecognizable after a heavy blizzard. Hills softened into smooth humps, valleys filled until they looked like open fields, and even trees bent under the weight, their familiar shapes disguised. Hunters stepping out after storms needed more than sharp eyes. They needed memory, intuition, and skill to reorient themselves in a land that no longer looked the same. What might surprise you is how families cultivated this sense of direction from the time children could walk. Parents trained youngsters to notice subtle cues, the angle of prevailing winds, the way snow drifted against hills, the faint line where grass poked through thin crusts. Children learned to mark the position of the sun even on cloudy days, to feel direction in their bones when sight was useless. You imagine a child standing in knee-high drifts, squinting at the sky, declaring confidently which way the herd had last moved. Some scholars remain divided on whether families deliberately placed markers before storms, such as poles or bundles tied to tall grass. Certain accounts describe such practices clearly, noting that they saved lives when snow buried the land. Others suggest reliance was almost entirely on memory and instinct, arguing that markers could be swept away too easily. The truth may be a mixture. Sometimes markers helped, sometimes the land itself was the only guide. A lesser-known detail from a trader's notes describes elders teaching children to close their eyes and walk a few steps, then guess direction by the feel of wind on their cheeks. It was practice, a game with serious stakes. To lose orientation in whiteout conditions could mean wandering into danger or wasting precious energy. Better to be trained early, even in play, than to be caught helpless later. Inside the lodge, you hear adults murmuring now, planning who will step outside first, who will check the drifts, who will scout for signs of movement. Dogs whine softly, eager to stretch their legs, perhaps to sniff out trails invisible to human eyes. Children huddle, wide-eyed, half excited, half fearful. To them, the blank world outside is both playground and danger. An unusual account from a missionary recalls walking with hunters after a blizzard and being bewildered when they stopped, crouched, and studied a snowdrift as if it were a book. "They read what I could not see," he admitted, noting how subtle depressions revealed where buffalo had once passed, or where wind had carved a landmark. The skill struck him as uncanny, though to the hunters it was simply another language of the land. Some anthropologists argue that this ability to navigate post-storm landscapes was not mystical but learned pattern recognition refined over years. Others suggest there was also a spiritual element, a belief that ancestors or spirits whispered guidance through wind and snow. The line between skill and vision, as always, blurs. You imagine a hunter standing still, eyes closed, listening, and knowing where to go without a map. What surprises you further is how calm the planning feels. There is no rush to fling open the flap and charge into whiteness. Instead, patience rules. Adults consider carefully, weighing the risk of becoming lost against the need to check food supplies or scout for herds. Waiting, conserving strength, is as much a strategy as walking. Survival is not about boldness alone, it is about timing. The flap stirs again, and light cuts into the lodge. A man steps out, snow squeaking under his boots. He pauses, scanning the horizon. You picture the silence he meets. A world flattened into endless white, the sun's pale glow glinting across drifts like glass. Each step he takes must be measured, each landmark confirmed. Behind him, others wait, trusting his sense of direction, his knowledge of how storms reshape the land. An unusual note from an explorer describes hunters dragging long poles behind them in fresh snow, leaving trails that others could follow back to camp. To him it looked clumsy, but he realized its brilliance when the landscape shifted again in a sudden gust. The line of dragged snow remained visible, a lifeline leading home. Some scholars debate whether storm navigation shaped broader cultural values of memory and observation. Was the constant need to notice details, tracks, wind, shadows, part of why oral tradition carried such weight? Did it sharpen minds to store vast information without writing, because forgetting could mean death in snow? The arguments persist, but watching the scouts outside, you sense the answer leans toward yes. The dogs bark, their voices sharp against the silence. Hunters crouch, studying something faint in the drift, perhaps the trace of a rabbit, perhaps a depression hinting at larger game. Even in hunger there is patience. They do not rush blindly. Each clue is weighed, each step deliberate. The storm may have erased much, but it cannot erase the knowledge stored in human memory, in instinct, in the partnership of people and dogs. Inside, children press to the hide walls, peeking through tiny gaps, eager to hear news. Elders sit by the fire, faces calm, trusting in the scout's skill. The smell of smoke and drying hides lingers, but now the air carries a sharper edge anticipation. Hope, the hunger for direction as much as for food. You close your eyes, imagining stepping into that white world yourself. Would you find your way, or would the silence swallow you whole? For those here, the answer comes not from luck, but from training, memory, patience, and the belief that even the blankest landscape can be read. So you settle back into the furs, listening as footsteps crunch outside, as voices call softly across the snow. The world may look erased, but for those who know how to read it, the story continues. The scout's footsteps fade into the distance, muffled by snow, and inside the lodge life resumes its rhythm. Yet beneath the ordinary tasks, the stoking of the fire, the rearranging of hides, the quiet chatter runs an undercurrent of strategy. Survival after storms is never left to chance. Planning, as much as hunting or gathering, is the true spine of endurance. It is well established that winter survival depended heavily on foresight. Families did not stumble into safety. They prepared with methodical care, often months in advance. Stores of pemmican, dried corn, and herbs were packed away long before the snow arrived. Hide repairs were made early in autumn, poles checked and trimmed, routes scouted. A storm could surprise travelers, but within camps, preparedness was a daily habit, woven into the culture like sinew into bowstrings. What might surprise you is how democratic this planning often was. Decisions about moving camp, rationing food, or risking hunts were not made by one person alone. Families gathered, voices overlapping in discussion, elders recalling past winters, younger hunters offering their observations. Choices were shaped by memory as much as by the immediate storm. Imagine sitting here, listening to the quiet arguments, one voice urging patience, another pressing for action, a third reminding them of the time herds shifted unexpectedly east after a blizzard. Survival was a conversation. Historians still debate whether these decisions were guided more by practical observation or by spiritual consultation. Some records emphasize the role of dreams, visions, or rituals in determining when to move or hunt. Others highlight pragmatic details: tracks spotted, weather patterns read, the state of supplies. Perhaps, as with so much else, both were true. Planning combined spirit and skill, faith and fact, until no clear line separated them. A lesser-known detail comes from an explorer who described families mapping snow conditions in the ashes of the fire pit. With sticks, they drew ridges, valleys, and drifts, marking where scouts had gone and where herds might be hiding. Their maps were erased within hours, he wrote, but for that morning they were the world. You picture it now, fingers tracing lines in ash, children watching wide-eyed, the storm's chaos tamed into shapes on the floor. The elder in the lodge now leans forward, speaking softly, his words deliberate. Others nod, murmur responses. You can't understand the exact phrases, but the tone is clear. Consideration, debate, weighing of options. A younger man gestures toward the flap, perhaps arguing for an early hunt. A woman shakes her head, her voice firm, reminding all of supplies still stored overhead. The conversation is not loud, but it vibrates with importance. An unusual note from a missionary describes his astonishment that women's voices carried such weight in these councils. He expected only men to decide. Yet mothers often spoke with authority, reminding hunters of the children's needs or recalling seasons when storms lasted longer than expected. They listened, he admitted, and the decision was shared. You sense that same balance here, every voice part of survival, not only the hunters. Some anthropologists argue that such collaborative planning reflected deeper values of community over individual heroics. Others claim outsiders exaggerated the equality, projecting ideals onto what they saw. Yet as you sit within this circle of murmuring voices, you sense truth in the former. Survival demanded cooperation. No single person, no matter how skilled, could guarantee safety against winter's fury. What surprises you further is the calm of these discussions. No shouting, no panic. Even hunger does not fray the edges of patience. Each voice is heard, each memory considered. The storm may have been chaos, but planning is order. You realize how much strength lies in this rhythm. Storms may be wild, but humans can meet them with steadiness. The firelight flickers, illuminating faces intent on the discussion. The elder gestures toward the roof, perhaps reminding others of how the snow packed high overnight, how the structure itself must be checked before travel. Another person points to the children, still curled under furs, proof that safety for the youngest is always the first measure of success. Every detail, snow depth, food stores, health of elders, mood of dogs, becomes part of the calculation. An unusual anecdote from a trader recalls a night when families debated whether to risk a long hunt after a blizzard. Voices weighed pros and cons deep into the night, until finally, an elder told a story of a past storm where haste led to loss. The memory shifted the decision, and they waited 3 more days. When herds finally appeared, their patience was rewarded. They remembered storms as though they were teachers, the trader wrote. You nod, Inwardly, patience, shaped by memory, is its own kind of weapon. Some scholars debate whether planning councils after storms had formal structure or were more spontaneous. Were there set times when decisions were made, or did they arise naturally as the fire burned and tasks demanded it? The records disagree. But sitting here, you sense the answer matters less than the outcome. Whether formal or casual, planning was constant, woven into survival like threads in a robe. You lean back, absorbing the murmurs, the fire's rhythm, the calm deliberation. There is no illusion of control, no one pretends they can master the weather. Instead, planning accepts uncertainty and bends around it. The storm has passed, but its lessons remain etched in minds and in voices. What surprises you finally is how this atmosphere feels familiar, even modern. You think of meetings in your own life, voices gathered to weigh options, to plan projects, to forecast risks. Yet here the stakes are primal: warmth, hunger, survival. And perhaps that is why the calm feels so profound. No distraction, no wasted noise, only the shared determination to endure. The council murmurs on, dogs shift restlessly, children sleep on, and outside the snow waits for decisions. Inside, order triumphs over chaos. You close your eyes, soothed by the knowledge that survival is not blind luck but careful thought, shared voices, and the memory of storms already faced. The council's murmur fades, and silence returns, save for the fire's sigh and the distant groan of snow shifting outside. Yet you sense another layer of protection in this lodge, something less tangible than furs or weapons, less immediate than food or fire. It lies in the songs, the whispers, the small rituals repeated almost without thought, spiritual practices that knit courage together when the storm threatens to unravel it. It is well established that winter was a season when ceremony carried particular weight. While summer brought large gatherings and public dances, blizzards pressed families inward, turning rituals into smaller, more intimate acts. A pinch of tobacco into the fire, a soft chant whispered before sleep, a feather brushed gently across a child's forehead. All were everyday moments infused with sacredness. What might surprise you is how seamlessly these gestures blended with ordinary life. There was no strict boundary between sacred and mundane. Stirring a pot of stew could become a prayer if a blessing was murmured. Adjusting the hides could be done with a whispered invocation for the storm to pass. Survival itself was ritual, and ritual was survival. Some scholars continue to debate whether these practices were primarily collective or individual. Certain accounts describe entire families chanting softly together, while others emphasize personal prayer whispered privately in the dark. The truth is likely both: communal strength when needed, individual courage when silence demanded. A lesser-known detail appears in the notes of an explorer who described lying awake in a lodge and hearing what he thought were snores, only to realize an elder was quietly chanting under his breath all night. The words, repeated endlessly, were like a thread stitching fear into calm. He admitted he could not understand the language, but the rhythm itself soothed him. The fire pops softly now, and smoke rises toward the lodge's crown. You imagine someone sprinkling sage onto the embers, its sharp scent cutting through the heavy air, curling upward to carry prayers into the storm's fading breath. The smell mingles with hide and wood smoke, creating a fragrance that is both earthy and otherworldly. An unusual note from missionaries mentions that children were often encouraged to join in these small offerings. A child might toss a berry into the flames or murmur a few words of thanks before eating. They learned to speak to the unseen as naturally as to each other, one missionary observed, surprised by how effortlessly sacredness was woven into childhood. Some anthropologists argue that such rituals gave psychological resilience, transforming helplessness into action. Others claim the acts were believed to have literal effects on weather, health, or safety. Perhaps both are true. The prayers both comforted and, in belief, protected. The line between faith and function was not sharp but blurred, a braid of meaning. What surprises you further is how quiet these practices often were. You might expect dramatic ceremonies, loud invocations, but instead the lodge is filled with whispers, murmurs, gentle gestures. Strength here is not loud, it is steady. You feel that steadiness now, as if unseen hands have laid another layer of insulation over the sleepers. A dog shifts, ears flicking, as though sensing the mood. Children sigh in their sleep, turning closer to parents. Adults sit in calm postures, some with eyes closed, lips moving faintly. The storm may rage or ease, but the rhythm of ritual continues, unbroken by weather. An unusual anecdote from a trader recalls being asked to place his hand over a flame as part of a prayer before sleep. He wrote that the heat made him uncomfortable, but afterward he felt oddly calmer, as though the fire had sealed a promise. The experience bewildered him, but it lingered in his memory as a moment of unexpected peace. Some scholars debate whether rituals during storms were aimed outward toward calming the weather, or inward toward calming hearts. Perhaps both goals overlapped. What matters is that families slept more soundly with prayers whispered, with herbs offered, with gestures performed. Sleep, after all, was as critical as food. Without rest, survival faltered. The firelight dances on the hides, shadows stretching and collapsing in rhythm. You feel the pull of drowsiness again, comforted by the thought that prayers spoken, sung, whispered, wrap the lodge as surely as snow and hides. Spiritual protection, unseen but palpable, forms another wall against the storm. What surprises you finally is how contagious the calm becomes. Even you, an outsider in imagination, feel soothed by the presence of these small acts. You do not need to know the exact words, the full meanings. The gestures themselves carry weight. The act of acknowledging forces beyond control, of joining voice and breath to the night's uncertainty. The lodge quiets again, children and adults drifting deeper into rest. The fire glows steady, smoke curls upward, and the storm whispers faintly beyond the hides. You let your eyes close, comforted by the invisible shield woven through ritual, prayer, and faith. The storm may test the body, but spirit answers with calm. So you sleep, wrapped in layers seen and unseen, the lodge a circle of safety held not only by poles and hides, but by whispered words that float like smoke into the winter sky. The prayers fade into silence, and once more the night returns to its rhythm, the storm groaning faintly outside, the fire glowing low, the sleepers breathing in unison. Yet as you shift under the furs, another thought presses. In how long can a lodge endure such storms, not just for one night, but for a season that stretches into weeks and months? The teepee itself becomes more than shelter. It becomes a living companion in survival. It is well established that the teepee was designed with remarkable adaptability. The poles, tall and sturdy, formed a frame that could flex under pressure, while the hide coverings shed snow and wind with surprising efficiency. In summer, flaps opened to release heat. In winter, the structure was cinched tight, snow packed along its base to seal warmth inside. This was no fragile tent, it was an architecture shaped by centuries of trial and wisdom. What might surprise you is how storms actually strengthened the teepee. Snow piled against the outer hides acted as natural insulation, forming a shell that kept warmth in and drafts out. What outsiders might see as a threat, the smothering weight of snow was instead a gift, if managed correctly. Families knew when to push snow away from the smoke hole, but also when to let drifts build along the base. Balance was everything. Some scholars remain divided over whether teepees could withstand the most extreme blizzards without damage. Some accounts describe poles snapping under relentless pressure, forcing families to rebuild. Others insist the design was so resilient that collapse was rare, especially when maintained carefully. Likely both were true. Skill in setup determined endurance, and mistakes were punished by storms without mercy. A lesser-known detail from an explorer's diary describes families adjusting poles even during storms, venturing briefly into the howling night to tighten ropes or re-angle stakes. They worked as though the lodge were alive, he wrote, tending it like a beast that must be fed or soothed. You picture that now figures crouching in snow, hands raw from cold, yet steady as they pulled knots tighter, trusting the structure to cradle them again. Inside, you glance upward. The poles above you converge into a crown, a circle that frames the smoke hole. In firelight they glow golden, rising like ribs of a great creature. The hides stretched over them ripple faintly with the storm's breath, creaking softly. You feel as though you are inside a chest, sheltered by the breathing body of the teepee itself. An unusual account from a missionary mentions that families sometimes spoke of lodges with affection, even giving them names. To him, it seemed fanciful, but to those who lived here, the structure was no less vital than dogs, weapons, or fire. It had its moods, its strengths, its weaknesses. To neglect it was unthinkable. To care for it was to honor survival itself. Some anthropologists argue that the circular design carried symbolic as well as practical meaning. The circle represented continuity, the cycles of seasons, the bonds of family. Others remain skeptical, suggesting function, not symbolism, was the driving force. But sitting here, watching faces glow in the round, you sense the symbolism was inevitable. In storms where chaos reigned outside, the circle inside was a promise of unity. What surprises you further is the quiet sound the teepee makes when snow slides from its sides, a soft hiss, almost like a sigh of relief. The structure releases weight, then steadies again. You hear it now, and the sound reassures you. The lodge is not fragile. It adjusts, responds, endures. A dog shifts at the flap, letting in a brief draft. The hides flutter, then settle, the poles groaning faintly in protest before quieting. The sound is not alarming but steady, like the joints of an elder shifting in sleep. You realize how deeply alive this place feels, how survival depends on partnership between people and the structure they built. An unusual anecdote from a trader tells of families carrying their teepee poles across vast distances, treating them with reverence, repairing them carefully if they cracked. He noted that poles sometimes lasted for decades, bearing the marks of many winters. They carried storms within their scars, he wrote, struck by the idea that wood could hold memory. Some scholars debate whether the teepee was the most efficient winter structure compared to earth lodges or dugouts used by other tribes. Critics argue that heavier shelters provided more insulation, while defenders point to the teepee's mobility and resilience. The argument remains unsettled, but tonight, within the warmth of this space, you feel the design's genius. It may not be unbreakable, but it is exactly enough. Flexible, warm, portable, alive. What surprises you, finally, is the sense of gratitude you feel toward the structure itself. You lean back, hand brushing the hide wall, feeling its rough texture warmed by firelight. The storm may rage, but this living circle holds you steady. It is not simply walls and poles. It is a companion, a guardian, a silent participant in survival. The fire pops once more. Shadows leap across the hides, and the teepee breathes with you. Outside lies snow and silence. Inside lies warmth and resilience. You close your eyes, comforted by the thought that for countless winters, this design has carried families through storms fiercer than yours, and it will continue to do so, as long as humans need circles against the chaos of snow. The storm has loosened its grip entirely now. Dawn spills into the lodge in pale sheets of light, reflecting sharply off snowdrifts that still tower outside. The air feels lighter, less burdened by fear. Inside, families stir in earnest, not only with relief but with renewed energy. The worst is over, yet the night just endured lingers in every face, every motion. You can see it in the way people stretch slowly, savoring the warmth, and in the way children laugh a little louder than usual, as if to push back the memory of the blizzard. It is well established that storms were woven into seasonal memory. They were not forgotten once past. They became lessons, folded into stories, guiding future choices. Children who woke to whispers of reassurance would grow up remembering how furs and fire, patience and prayer had saved them. Those lessons shaped how they built camps, rationed food, and taught their own children in winters to come. What might surprise you is how storms were often retold not as tragedies but as trials overcome. In oral traditions, hardship rarely stood alone. It was framed as a challenge answered with resilience. A blizzard that buried trails might later be remembered as the night laughter softened fear, or the night a bundle's prayer brought safety, or the night a dog pressed close enough to save toes from frostbite. Memory was not of suffering but of endurance. Some historians remain divided about whether these retellings romanticized hardship or reflected genuine cultural resilience. Certain accounts portray families as relentlessly positive, while others emphasize the silent scars storms left behind. The truth likely lives between suffering was real, but so was the power of framing it as victory. A lesser-known detail comes from a trader who lived with a plains family one winter. After each storm, he noted, they held small gatherings where elders told children the story of what had just happened, as though the storm were already history, already myth. They gave the children courage by turning fear into narrative, he wrote. You can imagine that now. The elder clearing his throat, children leaning forward, adults smiling knowingly as the storm is transformed into a tale before their very eyes. The fire burns brighter now as more fuel is fed into it, a symbol that the night's rationing is no longer necessary. Steam rises from another pot, thicker this time, richer. The smell of meat and fat fills the air. Children crowd closer, eyes wide with anticipation. Dogs circle eagerly, tails wagging. A night of scarcity gives way to a morning of plenty, however modest. An unusual account from a missionary describes how families sometimes celebrated the end of a storm with a feast, no matter how small. To outsiders, it seemed reckless to eat extra when resources were limited. Yet the act carried meaning, to honor the endurance of the night, to give thanks, to remind all that life was still abundant enough to share. They taught me that celebration is part of survival, he confessed. Some anthropologists argue that such rituals of relief were critical to mental health. Without them, the cycle of fear and hunger might spiral into despair. Others dismiss this, saying celebration was simply natural after hardship. Perhaps both are true, but either way, the laughter and warmth at storm's end kept spirits from fraying. What surprises you further is how quickly the lodge shifts from shelter back to home. Hides are straightened, weapons polished, garments repaired. The teepee hums again with ordinary sounds, mothers scolding children for spilling broth, dogs nosing for scraps, elders humming softly as they watch the fire. The extraordinary night dissolves into ordinary morning, as though the storm were already part of the past. The flap opens, and cold air rushes in. A man steps inside, cheeks red, eyes sparkling. He speaks quickly, and though you cannot understand the words, the tone is unmistakable. News of game. Perhaps tracks were found, perhaps herds are near. Excitement ripples through the lodge. Hunger will not linger long. The storm has not won. An unusual note from explorers tells of how people often framed such moments as proof of balance. The storm takes, the land gives. This rhythm of hardship and reward was accepted, even expected. To complain would be to miss the pattern. To endure was to find meaning in the cycle itself. Some scholars debate whether modern readers romanticize this endurance too much. Do we see only resilience and forget the suffering? Do we gloss over pain to admire strength? The question lingers. But sitting here, watching smiles spread as news of food arrives, you sense that both suffering and strength were real, intertwined. The storm was cruel, but survival is no less true. The fire crackles, laughter rises, and bowls are passed again. Children giggle, elders smile faintly, dogs bark once in joy. You lean back, warmed not just by the flames, but by the resilience glowing in every face. The storm has ended, but its lessons remain. Prepare well, share wisely, respect the unseen, lean on family, and never underestimate the strength of laughter. What surprises you finally is how peaceful you feel. The blizzard that once threatened to swallow the world has become only part of the story, woven into the tapestry of nights endured. And in that realization lies a quiet truth. Storms will always return, but so will the circle of fire, fur, and family. The storm has passed, and so has the long night. You breathe slower now, the tension draining from your shoulders, your thoughts softening like snow settling into silence. The fire burns low, but its glow is steady, no longer desperate, only gentle. You hear the last embers crackle, faint as whispers, and you let that sound carry you deeper into rest. Outside, the land is blanketed in white, a canvas washed clean by the storm. The air is still crisp, waiting for the sun to rise higher, but inside you remain wrapped in warmth, layered in hides, guarded by the echoes of song, story, and prayer. You remember the laughter of children, the comfort of dogs, the steady murmur of elders, the flicker of flames that never surrendered. Close your eyes and see the teepee again, poles stretching upward like ribs of a giant protector, hides drawn tight, snow hugging its base like another blanket. You are inside that circle still, safe and calm, no wind able to reach you here. The storm has become memory, softened by the glow of survival. Breathe slowly. Let the rhythm of your breath match the fire's last sighs, the steady heart of the lodge. You are not alone. Generations before you endured nights just like this, and generations after will do the same. You are part of that long, unbroken story, resting now as they rested, safe in the circle of warmth. So let the weight of the blankets sink into you. Let your body grow heavy. Let your mind drift like snowflakes spiraling downward. The storm is gone, the night is gentle, and sleep waits to gather you fully. Drift now, quietly, peacefully. Sweet dreams.